Well, good afternoon, Irish fans. Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the host of today's podcast. I am also the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me, as always, is Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher. See more oomphed. He's the publisher.
There you go.
Of
there you go.
irishbreakdown.com.
Put some respect on that name, buddy.
You're darn right, man. But it's Friday, and that means it's Mailbag Friday, Brian. And
Vince's favorite day of the week.
My favorite day of the week. There is no question about that. And I've got Chick-fil-A in my tummy, and so I'm a happy man. And we are going to dive right into some questions. But before we do, we are obviously post-spring game, post-spring practice. And we are going to kind of let everybody know what we're going to be doing here for the next few weeks, kind of how things are going to go. Brian, when you and I are together, we're going to kind of go position by position, talk about the post-spring, kind of what things look like, where things are headed, who maybe needs to do what over the summer. And then when I'm not with you, I believe you are going to focus on your big board, your recruiting, things of that nature.
Just kind of go through each position and break down where things stand. And then also, obviously, as things happen during the summer, if there's news, if there's a commitment, if there's a topic that comes up that needs to be addressed at that time, we'll jump into it and address it.
Absolutely.
And then we'll get back on schedule. So, yeah, it'll just basically be like it's a combination of a review of the spring by position and then sort of a looking ahead to what questions were answered, what questions remain, and where do things stand as we get ready to go into the summer? Because this is a big time for Notre Dame football. It's not like it's not like now they get the next 4 months off until fall camp, right? I mean, they're going to have summer workout, summer school. This is where you're going to see
recruiting camps too.
Yeah, and this is where you're going to see some younger players really make their growth. You know, now that they've had kind of the guys like Tosh Baker, they got their butts handed to them a little bit for the first time in their lives, this spring.
Sure. Yeah.
Now you can see when they take those big jumps and those type of things. So that's kind of going to be.
And the other thing is they're all going to be live shows. You and I dig the live shows. We love having people comment with the live shows. So we're going to do live shows here.
And speaking of live shows, Vince, I want to jump into the saltiness that Connor and Dylan Hoffman are already bringing to the show. So Connor says, Brian, if I'm understanding you correctly, the star system is infallible, and therefore recruits like Bradshaw will be no good. Correct. Well played. And then Dylan Hoffman says, I get the vibe Brian is not a fan of Bradshaw. You guys are bringing it right off the gate, right off the start.
Well, and here you go, Tommy,
podcast.
Nor is he a fan of the star system. So
now, see, Tommy's the only one being serious at this point in time.
That's fair. That is also fair. That is fair.
Yes. So very well done, fellas. Very well. Very well.
I'll let you jump in on that in just a second. But I want to say all the shows are going to be live, obviously, and we love doing the Q&A at the end of most of our shows. Obviously, Mailbag is different. We just kind of go through and we answer questions and we have some fun with it. It's a little bit more loose, a little bit more fun. Normal podcast, obviously, we'll do a Q&A at the end. But if you want to get your question read, right away, then hit us up with one of those super chats. That'll be support the channel, obviously, but it'll also get your question taken care of right away. So if you want to comment on something we're talking about right then and there, hit us with that super chat, and we will comment right away.
We will never, as long as I'm in charge at Irish Breakdown, and since it's my company, and I'm always going to be in charge of Irish Breakdown, we will never have a situation where you can only get your voice heard by paying money. Never. But at the same time, we also appreciate that support. So if you do give a super chat, we'll always bump you up to the top of the line. But it'll never be a situation where we will only take questions from people that pay us. That is something that y'all choose to do to support our channel, and it is greatly appreciated and always welcome. And it helps us to do more shows, to hire more people, to do different things, and it's greatly appreciated. But that will always be something that you choose to do. It will never be something that we demand of you or make those requirements.
We'll never do that to you. I make my kids pay me to ask me questions.
But you got 5 of them.
That's different. So, I make all kinds of money.
You have to.
You have to.
It's just a way to make some money back off of what they moved off.
Absolutely, because I'll tell you what, it's a money pit. But anyway, so Mailbag Friday, Brian. Let's jump right in here. So I'm heading right to the top.
Let's go down to Preston, actually, because this is kind of some newsworthy thing, Vince, with KMA Preston.
Hit it.
Holden Stace is committing tomorrow. He announced, I was just told by Jason, who is one of our listeners in our channel, said that he announced on Instagram that he will be making his decision tomorrow at 5 p.m.
Okay.
So obviously, I like where Notre Dame is at. That's about all I'm going to say. And I think I've been pretty as often as possible, kind of made it clear that I felt that Notre Dame has been a great position with that one for a while.
Your opinion of Holden himself?
Outstanding player. He's. I think the difference about the tight ends in this class that Notre Dame is after, when you look at Holden Stace and you look at Eli Raridan, is they're different than a guy like Alize Jones, he was Alize Jones at the time,
when
became
Alize committed,
and Michael Mayer is. Those guys were more ready to play as freshmen. They were just grown-ups the minute they stepped foot on campus. Kyle Rudolph was kind of that way. These are guys that need a little bit more time, but the ceilings are just as high as a lot of the tight ends that they've signed. I mean, Michael Mayer's in a bit of a kind of a unicorn status when it comes to tight end signees that Notre Dame has landed. But when you compare Raridan and Stace to some of the guys they've gotten in the past, I mean, to me, Stace has the similar upside to me of what Alize Mack had upside wise. Now, Alize Mack never matched
didn't reach that upside, yeah, right.
But similar player, whereas Raridan's sort of a kind of that, Kyle Rudolph type of player, not the fluid athlete that Tyler Eifert was, but a really good vertical player, good feet, and it has the potential to be a good all-around player. It'd be an excellent 1-2 punch at tight end if they're able to get Stace to go with Raridan.
Okay. Dylan jumped in early. I'm going back to the top, Brian. He said he's missed the last 2 live sessions, much to his dismay. How do you think other schools' top programs are feeling about Notre Dame's new recruiting methods and tactics to brand their players? And I know you had an article out on irishbreakdown.com. Was it this morning?
It was yesterday.
Was it yesterday? Okay, it was yesterday about the billboards that are going up, which, by the way, I think are awesome. I think those billboards, what a great idea to put that out there. But go ahead.
I think the fact that they put one in Columbus, Ohio, was about the most savage thing I've ever seen Notre Dame do on a recruiting trail.
I loved it.
There's one, I'm told, I don't know this for a fact, I'm told there's one real close to Arizona State's campus. So I think we talked about it's a brilliant strategy. I've heard from a coach of at least one Power 5 program so far that said, yeah, that's, after busting my chops for a minute, he was like, yeah, that's actually a really, really wicked smart idea that you're doing. It's being noticed. It's being noticed by other programs. It's being noticed by recruits. It's being noticed by coaches and parents, and especially the Notre Dame players, I think, are really digging it. So because they're the center of it, right?
Yes, that's
it's not Brian Kelly. It's not Marcus Freeman. It's not.
Which, by the way, I love that, because it's one thing to put a billboard out, in those places, but to center it around the actual student athletes, I think is awesome because they get on board, and I just think that's a great strategy. I mean, it takes the billboard strategy up to another level to me.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
All right, let's see here. Searcher Green has a question about Sibo Flemister. Does Notre Dame still have the student-led judicial council, and does it affect situations like Sibo is in? How does it work? I have always been curious about this. Never heard of it at another school.
Number one, I believe it still is in effect. I don't know that for sure. It's been a couple years since we've had to worry about this with a Notre Dame player. How does it work? I honestly don't know enough about it, other than the judicial council meets and decides a punishment on a player, or not. It's not on a player, on a student, and it's not just football players that this happens on. And I know that there are other schools that have this. It's just Notre Dame, like with anything at Notre Dame, it just becomes more popular and publicized than it does at other places. And I would imagine that at other places they don't have the ability to render decisions on football players. It would be another thing. But as Notre Dame has always been true to, and I actually, this is one of the things I respect about Notre Dame.
Yep, I agree.
If you're a student in Notre Dame, you're a student in Notre Dame. You're not because you're a football player. There are some ways that you're put above everybody else. Let's be honest. I mean, you get the access to things, you get gear, you get all types of things. But in regards to the demands put on you, being at class, doing the work, you're not going to have cheerleaders doing, work for students or any football players. You're not going to have teachers' assistants or whatever the case may be, marking check, that they're there even when they're not there, those type of things. And I wish all schools were that way. That's how it should be. And can it be a hindrance to Notre Dame getting certain players? Yeah, but you know what? Those players shouldn't be at Notre Dame. If you're not coming to Notre Dame because they make you go to class and they make you do the work and they make you actually educate yourself,
sure,
then go somewhere else. You don't need to be at Notre Dame. So that's actually something I respect.
Okie dokie. John has a question, kind of a big picture question, really. What adjustments does Notre Dame have to make in 2021 to average 200 rushing yards per game?
John,
That's
honestly,
interesting.
Yeah. So to begin, Vince, I'm not a big fan of looking at the standard. You have to rush for X number of yards per game.
Right.
I'm just not. For me, when I look at it, it's a situation where if you look at the last two national champions, they didn't rush for 200 yards a game. Alabama was at 183, and LSU, I believe, I'm looking it up right now, but I believe they were in the 160s for rushing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were at 166.8. What I'm looking for, and to me, what balance is for me.
I'm interested to hear what you say to this.
Balance for me is that you're efficient and explosive in every phase of the game. And that doesn't just mean run versus pass. That means running inside and running outside. It means when you're passing, it means screen game, quick game, intermediate, and deep throwing. You have to be efficient and explosive in all areas to truly be a balanced offense. So I don't know if I care that Notre Dame rushes for 200 yards a game. If they're over 5 yards a carry, that's more of what I care about. I care about the fact that when the elite teams that you play can take away one part of your game, can you win with that other part?
Sure.
That, to me, is the bigger question about the rushing offense next season as opposed to 200 yards. Because if you go out and throw for 450 because the other team can't guard you and they're putting 8 in the box, I don't care if you ran for 120 yards. You know what I mean? Because they are trying to take away your run game, and so
sure,
you just threw for 1,000,000 yards and you won by 30 points. So that's going to drag your average down. So for me, it's more about, I don't know what this offense is going to have to do to be more efficient and explosive in the run game is have a better balance of declared runs versus misdirection runs. Declared runs essentially are runs where everybody's kind of going in the same direction. Okay, inside zone, outside zone, stretch plays, things like that, Vince, right?
Yep.
Even power plays, play side gap schemes like power are, to me, are declared runs because essentially, you're kind of working in a direction compared to, what I view as not undeclared runs, which are, you may have half the guys going this way and then half the guys going the other way. You may show buck sweep action this way, but you're actually running the opposite direction. Counter concepts,
sure.
Wrap schemes, things like that. I think they're going to need to mix up some of that stuff because they're not going to be able to, with this offensive line, to just line up and blow you up off the ball. There's going to be a little bit more creativity from a schematic standpoint. There's going to have to be a little bit more creativity from a formation alignment standpoint. Vince, this is also a huge, big reason why we have said that Notre Dame needs to improve its perimeter passing attack. Now, perimeter passing attack relative to the run game is perimeter screens, quick game, outside concepts that are partly RPOs, but also just normal pass concepts. Because if my team's playing your team, Vince, even if we're not running RPOs, if I'm beating you all day with bubble screens and quick outs and flood concepts and back shoulder throws and things where I'm beating you to the perimeter consistently because you're tucked inside to defend the run, I may not run for 85 yards, but I'm going to have about 120 yards worth of perimeter screens and perimeter quick throws because I'm constantly out leveraging you. Now, your reaction is to either A, keep letting me do it, or B, you got to widen out your look, or you're going to bring the corners up to defend it. Well, now if you bring the corners up, now I'm going to be able to have more success with you vertically. And so Notre Dame's perimeter pass attack has to be effective, not just with RPOs, although RPOs are an assist to an inexperienced, not as dominant run game. But it's also about being an effective perimeter passing team, period. Dropbacks, play action, screens, all of it. Because the better I am at attacking the sideline and attacking the perimeter, the less likely it is that you as the defensive coordinator can play with a reduced box to defend my run. Now, all of a sudden, we're starting to get numbers on you. It's 5-on-5 now. Now I feel a little bit better about the success of my running game. to do that. And I think there's other things they can do, like 2-back sets where they use one of the running backs to be effective in the pass game. There's all types of things like that they can do, Vince. And those are things you and I have talked a little bit about in the past, that the pass game is going to have to protect the run game a lot more than it has in the past.
You know, it's funny. You gave a very detailed answer to that question. I was basically going to say I would love it if the running backs combined, between the two of them, combined rushing and receiving for 200 yards a game.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, with the way that they're getting the running backs involved now, they're an integral part of this offense. And so if they've got the ball in their hands, I almost consider that like one stat. So if they're combining for 200 yards, then I'd be pretty happy. That would make me very, very happy. I don't know that this offense is going to be set up to run for 200 yards a game. I just, with the way they're going to get it out to, like you said.
I think it can. But I think it's going to be different. I think it's going to be because it's going to look more like the 2017 offense, not from the scheme or style standpoint. Okay, I'm not talking offensive line wise. So please, when you hear me say 2017, please let me finish the explanation. I'm not saying they're going to look like they're going to run for 200, and maybe 2015 is a better example. And what I mean by that is, I think there's going to be a lot more big runs this year because of the talent at running back.
Sure.
So, they may not have the snap after snap after snap success that they had. But I could see the yards being similar, but the yards per carry taking a huge jump.
I got you.
I would also encourage people, and Vince, I'm curious as to how you think about this. I would encourage people to, when you are evaluating a game, and if Notre Dame actually does stick to RPOs this year, we're going to break that down and give you the numbers every game. I would encourage you to always incorporate the success of the RPO throws into the success of the running game.
Sure.
An example to that would be, I believe it was I'm trying to remember which game it was in 2018, back when Notre Dame was actually doing a lot of RPOs.
When Book first took over.
Correct. When the offense was really rolling. And I believe it was Northwestern. It might have been Pitt. I can't remember which game it was, but there was a game where Notre Dame ran for not a ton of yards. I think it was Northwestern. But they completed like 8 or 9 RPO throws for over 100 yards. And it's like, well, that's a direct reflection of the run game because they're playing you to stop your run. You're pulling it, throwing out, and gaining 8-9 yards. There was a play against Northwestern, I believe it was, where it was like 3rd and 8, and they pulled it and threw a bubble screen to Cole Kmet and picked up a first down because Northwestern was so overplaying the running game. And in that game, Ian Book, you look at the Notre Dame rush for, I'm looking at it, 121 yards for 3.0 yards per carry against Northwestern. But Ian Book went 22 of 34 for 343 yards on a road win over a team that won the Big Ten West that year. So you're going to have to understand that the game has changed. And if you're going to properly evaluate how the success you had on designed running plays, you have to incorporate the RPO concepts off of it because those are a direct reflection of teams committing too many resources to stop the run.
All right. Moving on. Cam A. Preston has an interesting question here. Do you think any of the non-early enrollee freshmen could end up making an impact on the team this year? I assume impact means, not necessarily starting, but playing a good deal.
Well, I think the transfer of Jordan Johnson could have a big impact on the potential for Deion Colzie to now climb up the depth chart. He's a guy to me because, and Jordan's not a real big guy. He's like 6'1.5", close to 6'2", but on the current receiving core, he's one of the bigger receivers. And I felt his style of play was suited well for that boundary position. So I think that now that he is gone, that could potentially open up an opportunity, especially if there's an injury or if Kevin Austin gets injured again or is not back to full speed. Then I think a guy like Deion Colzie could step in and have an impact. I think with the situation with Sebo Flemister, we know nothing about the situation other than what was reported in the news yesterday. We know nothing about how Notre Dame was going to handle this. Having said that, it just raises the reality that one injury or one issue at running back, and all of a sudden one of those two true freshmen is going to step. Because Notre Dame's always had 3 running backs get touches.
You need 3. I agree.
And so if something happens, if Sebo gets hurt, if Tyree gets hurt, if Kyron Williams gets hurt, if somebody gets suspended, whatever the case may be, then I think one of those freshmen is good enough to step in. And they're both bigger backs too, Vince. That's the thing, is they don't need like a year in the weight room to be able to handle playing college football. I think Logan Diggs and Audric Estime are good enough to play as freshmen. And the only reason they're not going to play as freshmen, or I'm not talking more about them, is because of how good the running back depth chart is, which is amazing how far it's come in just 2 years.
Well, and I think that the role that we kind of envisioned for Sibo Flemister could be taken up by one of those guys. You know what I mean? Like, I think those skill sets mesh up. It's not like if God forbid you lost Kyron Williams or Chris Tyree, the skill sets of the incoming freshmen aren't in that skill set. Right. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that Sibo Flemister is going to be lost here. I'm just saying if something happens,
it just brings up the point that, hey, you're an injury, a suspension, a anything away from a freshman having to play. That's the point of it.
Right.
It just raises that awareness. And defensively, Vince, there's two guys that I would have my eye on. Prince Collie and Kerry G are the two that I would say. More so Prince Collie. I think Kerry G more out of need, but I think Prince Collie is going to be hardest to keep off the field this year. And maybe it's not on defense, to Preston's question. Maybe it's not on defense. But as long as Prince puts in the work this summer, I'll be shocked if he's not like a starter and a regular and a key player on the special teams. Because the reality is he's not a 5-year player, Vince.
No, I agree.
So you get him in there and get him a chance. And then that number's smaller because of how big Notre Dame's early enrollee class is. There's just not a lot of guys. So and I think there's a question up there by Jonathan Vince, a recruiting question, I believe, right above Tommy's sarcasm comment.
Did I miss one?
Yeah, I got it right here. So Jonathan asks, do you favor Sneed over Junior? Honestly, Jonathan, it depends on the role. I mean, again, when I look at Sneed and Junior, I see two different players that would play two different roles. So it's not even really about favoring one or the other. That's why I said it all depends on how you view Josh Burnham. If you view Josh Burnham as a pure Mike, then Jalen Sneed would be the better take. If you don't view Josh Burnham as a Mike, then Jalen Sneed Junior Tuihalamaka is going to be your guy. But at the end of the day, I get asked this question a lot, and this is a good question by Jonathan, but I've asked on and off the show, like in private messages and stuff, who do you like better of the three linebackers? What would be your ideal class? And my answer is it doesn't matter. Give me two of those three. In any order that you want, they are all extremely talented, high-ceiling, high-ranked players that if you add them to what you already have, you're going to be loaded. But if you're talking about the perfect class from an everyone fitting together standpoint, I go back to what I said last time we talked about this, which is it just depends on how you view Josh Burnham. I personally would like to see Josh Burnham be more of a Will, maybe a Viper, a guy that you can move around, which means there's value to having a Junior Tuihalamaka in the class. But I would like to have Junior and Jalen Sneed in a perfect world. But if Sebastian Cheeks is also part of the class, I'm thrilled about that too. And that's why I get hesitant sometimes to even mention it, because it's almost then it comes like, oh, Sebastian Cheeks is third of three studs, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you look at it like you look at the NFL draft. Well, gee, who do you want? A quarterback. Do you want Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, or Aaron Rodgers? Oh, well, you're stuck with the third guy. Okay,
Aaron Rodgers,
right? And that's a hyperbolic comment because we're talking about arguably the three greatest quarterbacks of our generation, but. The point being, there's not a losing scenario in here for Notre Dame if they get two of the three that we talked about.
All right. I like that. Jeff, I don't know how familiar you are with all the former Notre Dame players that are out there coaching, but he wants to know if there's any former players that you would think would be a good addition to the coaching staff, and he throws out Murray Stovall, I guess, as an option.
Yeah, I'm not sure where Mo Stovall's at now. Last I heard, he was at IMG Academy. I'm not sure if he's still coaching. I don't know a lot about what Mo has done. I know I loved Mo Stovall as a player, and I always like bringing back alums if they're guys that are serious coaches and are going to grind and put in the work and do those types of things. That hasn't always been the case with Notre Dame alums that have come back, and so that's a key for me. But, like Anthony Weaver is now coaching with the Baltimore Ravens. If there ever came a time where Mike Elston finally got that head coaching job, somewhere else, and they went and hired Anthony Weaver to replace him, then that'd be great. Again, that's only if Mike Elston, leaves because he's getting a head coaching job, because he's absolutely killing it right now. Jeff Burris is a defensive back coach at Louisiana Tech. They've had some guys drafted recently. So he's doing some good things. So he's a guy that I would keep my eye on. And I know that Tyler Stockton has done well at Ball State, but he still has a lot more to prove to me before I'm ready to start talking about him as a coach. Other than that, I'm not sure of what former players are even coaching, to be honest with you, because I don't really study NFL coaching staffs and things like that.
Sure.
A whole lot.
That would be a deep well to fall into, I would imagine. There's probably a lot of guys out there.
Mm-hmm.
Liam has a good question here. Do recruits see the new offense and what is going to be via practice film when doing a call with Reese and Dell, or is their only source previous year's game films and a statement that we are changing? I don't know how much recruits pay attention to spring. I'm sure that when they're in a Zoom call, coaches, one of the good things coaches can do is they can say, look, this is where we see you in our offense, in our defense, whatever. Keep an eye on this number, and then they'll show some practice film or they'll show some game film, etc. So I'm sure there's some of that. You can probably speak to this better than me. I don't know how many recruits are sitting down watching spring games.
It's more about what the coaches are showing with them in their phone calls. That's more what it is. And so it's not like, and I don't know if Liam's question is thinking like the 3-minute highlights that we're seeing. I think it's more of when Coach Reese is sitting down and they're talking about changes on offense, what are they using to show that those changes are happening? I think they would use practice film, in my opinion. Sure, and I'm pretty confident that I've heard players talk about sitting down with the coaches and going over the offense. They haven't said specifically what it is, but I would imagine it's not showing a wide receiver in last year's film. I would imagine that's not part of the conversation. And if it is, that's poor recruiting strategy. I just don't think that's what's going on. I think it's sitting down in practice and showing them, hey, here's the all 22 of our practice film. Here's, I want you to watch this guy because this is how we're going to use you. And
exactly.
And I think those types of things are happening. But that stuff's not going to have a huge impact on kids other than the kids that were already liking Notre Dame a lot anyway. To get the kids that we've talked about that maybe like Notre Dame, but they're second, third, or fourth, it's going to have to happen in games. Or kids that right now aren't considering Notre Dame because of the offense, it's going to have to happen in games. And if Notre Dame comes out this year and Jack Cohn's going for 275 to 300 plus in the first 4 or 5 games, and you go back and look at what happened with Boston College last year, and this is not meant to draw any parallels between Notre Dame, BC, the quarterback. This is simply to make a point. When you look at BC had been struggling to throw the football for a while now, right? This is a team that used to be really successful throwing the football, had some quarterbacks that went to the NFL over the years. And you go look at they were struggling to recruit receivers. Well, then you look at the last year, early in the season, their quarterback throws for over 300 yards in 4 of his first 5 games and throws for 7, 8, 10 touchdowns in his first 5 games. Well, all of a sudden, I'm on Twitter and I'm seeing receivers committing to BC, tight ends committing to BC, guys being interested. And the same thing on an even bigger scale happens to Notre Dame because all of a sudden you start throwing for 3 bills a game or 280 and 3 touchdowns and you're ripping off big plays and you're got 4 or 5 guys catching balls. Now all of a sudden players are going to look at it. And it's like what we talked about recently with Alizé Jones when he was in high school, Alizé Mack. Said Notre Dame could show me film of how they're going to use me. UCLA was basically doing it on a chalkboard, essentially, or on a whiteboard. About here's but they didn't have film to show me. The more film that Notre Dame can show these kids in games, that's what's truly going to start having an impact.
No doubt. And then we've got some comments in here about billboards. Brandon says, whoever came up with that needs to get a raise. I agree. Smart. And then KMA Preston wants to know if there's any specific states that you are aware of where Notre Dame is trying to increase their recruiting footprint. Columbus, Ohio was a great one. That was fantastic.
That was great. I think that was not so much about getting kids from Columbus as just,
whatever, man. I dig it.
Savage. Arizona's one that I think Notre Dame is definitely trying to get a foothold back into. The talent in that state is increasing a lot. And it's not so much the volume of players, but it's more of the top 10 players in Arizona now are a whole lot better than the top 10 players in Arizona 10 years ago.
Sure.
The depth at the top is really starting to improve. And you're starting to get difference makers in that state, like high-level players in that state. Obviously, Notre Dame got Tosh Baker recently. They got Devontae Neal a number of years ago. Cole Luke was from the state of Arizona. So they've had some success in that state. And now you look at guys like Anthony Lucas that they're going after. There's some 2023 kids from Arizona that have offers already. So that's a state. Texas is another big one. Mike Elson has been kind of He's been dipping into Texas recently to get some defensive linemen. Nana Osafo-Mensah, Hunter Spears was from the state. They've been trying to go back in there. They've had a success with a couple tight ends, but they're trying to really increase their foothold in the state of Texas. One of the places that had a billboard was Dallas, the Dallas area.
Okay.
They have more coaches hitting that state. They're throwing out a lot more offers to that state. Part of this billboard thing, you have to understand, is it was not just about a billboard, right? A billboard by itself is cool, but it doesn't move the needle as much as what followed it, what followed it was a massive phone call push from the staff. So coaches calling high school coaches in Texas, hey, look, just so you know, we love Texas football. We're definitely getting back into the state. We want to get back in the state. We want to recruit more kids from Texas. We think Texas has great football. Georgia's been a push a lot recently. Notre Dame would like to get more involved in the D.C. area because there's always a lot of talent in the D.C. area, the Northern Virginia, D.C. area. So an even bigger impact in the DMV. If you think about the state of Virginia, for example, Notre Dame hasn't landed a lot of kids from Virginia, but a lot of the kids they've got from Virginia have been very good. And you'll go back to Greer Martini, C.J. Prosise, obviously Chris Tyree. There's this kid that played Rover for Notre Dame recently named Jeremiah Wusu-Koromoa, who was from Virginia. So the players they're getting from that state are impact players, and they would like to get more of that type of player. And so that's why you saw in North Carolina is another one, because North Carolina is a booming state. I mean, a booming state. In 10 years, we're going to look at the electoral college number for North Carolina. We're going to look at what it was 5-6 years ago, and it's not going to look anything. It's going to be way bigger because it's a really growing state. And so just the whole east, kind of the mid-Atlantic, is another area where Notre Dame is trying to get a much, much bigger impact.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm going to skip down to Tommy. Brian, I just drove through Columbus. Did he say which highway it's on?
Yes, let me.
315 is that one right there. Off Highway 315. I don't know Ohio, Columbus very well.
So my buddy said, so the guy that I talked to that told me about last night, Vince, I think 315, he said was where it was. He said it's off a state route 315 in Columbus.
There you go.
And then he said something else about there's one, I guess, on Lane Avenue. I don't know if those two are the same thing. That's supposedly close to Ohio State's campus. I'm not sure. That one I'm not as sure of, but there definitely was the one off of 315.
To get it up on the Jumbotron at Ohio State.
Yep.
Anyway,
you may not want to start that war. You may not want to declare full war. You know, it's one thing to throw a couple salvos. You may not want to declare full war on that one.
All right, Dylan wants to know the recruiting calendar here. Are the coaches on the road right now till summer ball? Can they only talk to high school coaches until the dead period is over?
Yeah, dead period means no contact on campus, so you can't be on our campus and we can't be on yours.
Right, it's literally a dead period.
Dead period means no face-to-face contact, no trips, no travel, nothing.
And the dead period is also in July usually. I don't know if that's going to
change this year because there's always a couple dead periods. Yeah, but this one's going to be interesting since it's been dead for so long.
Yeah, exactly. Samuel Ramirez, what is the status of Osito Ekwonu in terms of a chance to surge in the rotation, or is his time already gone?
No, his time's definitely already gone. I mean, essentially, he's a redshirt sophomore this year, and in reality, he's technically a redshirt freshman if they like him enough because of the COVID year. Even if you redshirted in 2019, you can still count 2020 as a redshirt because of the COVID season. So he has plenty of time left, and he's been buried behind older players the entire time. So I don't think his time has passed. I think the fact that they moved him to Viper was part about just running low on numbers. You know, Will Schweitzer got hurt, but also because there is looking for an opportunity to get him a chance to play. And so I think that I think if they weren't really worried about him, they wouldn't have moved him. They just left him buried. They would have moved somebody else that could play, in my opinion.
All right. Richard has a comment about the billboards. The billboards are making these kids rock stars. Hands down the best tactical approach I have seen since I became a fan in the mid-'90s. Any clue where the idea came from? He or she needs a raise. So whoever it is, apparently everybody just wants them to get more money, which is
– I mean, honestly, this is the kind of thing that is a group effort. I mean, you don't just have one guy figures it out, one guy or gal figures it out, and then he or she carries it out all over. I think obviously this is a push from Mike Elston to be part of it. Now, whether or not it was Mike Elston's idea or if he was doing what a good leader should do, which is, hey, y'all, here's what we need to do. Here's what I'm looking for. What are some ideas? Let's draw on everybody's expertise. I'm a football coach, right? But let's draw on everybody's expertise. I do know that the Notre Dame staff, Mike Elston and the rest of the Notre Dame staff, and Mike Elston is a recruiting coordinator, they're trying to involve more and more non-football people in recruiting. And what I mean by that is exactly stuff like this.
Yeah.
Advertising, marketing, things along those lines. They can't tell you what to say in regards to selling your football program, but they can certainly give you some strategies to get your brand in front of more and more people and can do things to say, how can I relate to 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds? Because right now, me as a 42-year-old, I don't know how to relate to an 18-year-old. I'm not going to go hanging out with a bunch of 18-year-olds. That'd be kind of creepy, and in some states maybe illegal. It'd just be weird. So it's about how can we reach that audience and let them know what we have. So it's a team effort, and to me that's the best thing about it. But look, Mike Elston's the one driving this whole train, right? I mean, that's the reality of it.
D-Rock, gentlemen, a segment of the fan base out there thinks the team with the bye week has an advantage going into their next game versus an opponent. Your thoughts? I think it's an antiquated idea, to be honest with you, based on all of the analysts that are out there now, all of the pre-work that is done. I don't know that a bye week gives you an advantage unless you've got a guy coming back from injury, so he's got more opportunity, more of a chance, I guess. But I don't really see it as that much of an advantage anymore. Maybe it was 20 years ago.
Even then, I don't think it was.
But I think you can make an argument either way. But personally, I don't think it's an advantage.
I think there are times here and there where a bye week would help, but it's usually luck of the draw. Whereas,
I think it's specific to that team and what's going on.
Their stud running back was going to be out for 2 weeks. One of those weeks happened to be a bye week, and now he's healthy. He only missed one game, right?
Yeah, right.
Those type of things that happen. But I've and as a coach, bye weeks are good in regards to it allows you to get rested. But sometimes bye weeks really stink because it gets you out of your routine.
Exactly.
And that's the thing is football is very huge. Sports in general, it's routine is important. You get these players in, and you get out of that routine, and it's what's my class today? What am I going to do with my time? And then the other thing that tends to happen during bye weeks is a lot of coaches are like, okay, this is the week to add a bunch of new stuff. And I think that can be one of the worst responses.
That happens all the time, yeah.
I think the success of a bye week is more about how good is your team. Because I think it was this year. Remember, everybody's complaining in the offseason about how the ACC gave all these teams bye weeks before they played Notre Dame.
Right.
And everybody got all upset about it. Well, yeah, exactly. And, I mean, Notre Dame ran the table,
right?
This season. So, I mean, I don't get into that stuff. I think that there are certain matchups like, hey, maybe if we could have an extra week to prepare for Navy. I think a bye week is better after you play an option team than to have one before. But I just think if your team is good, you're going to be fine after bye weeks. If your team's not good, you're not going to be good after bye weeks.
Notre Dame 21-64. How big of a production jump do you see Chris Tyree making this year? I think huge. I mean, the thing is, he had good production as a freshman, and for a freshman, I thought he had good. Wasn't he just under 500 yards on the ground? I mean, that's
like
good
90
production.
of that came on one carry.
That's fair.
I think for me, it's going to be more first, second, and third quarter production.
It's going to be catching the ball.
Well, for me, I look at his numbers, and you look at Chris Tyree's numbers, and he had a 90-plus yard touchdown run against Syracuse basically at the end of the game in mop-up duty, right? You look at the Clemson game. He had a 20-plus yard, 21-yard touchdown run in that game in mop-up duty. Yeah, I look at it and I say, I think a lot of his production came, he had 74 yards against Boston College. A good chunk of that came after Kyron Williams got hurt. So I think a good chunk of his production this year came in late games, mop-up duty. I think this year the production, whether we see a jump of 100 yards, 200 yards, if it's like a 100-yard jump in rushing yards, it's not going to look like he had a great year in production, but it was a jump in meaningful production.
Yeah, right.
It's first quarter runs, second quarter runs. And then he's the guy that's not in the game anymore in the fourth quarter because they're giving Sebo or Estime or Logan Diggs those carries. And then, of course, to your point, Vince, when you did this, I think he's going to catch the ball a little bit more this year. I still think that the biggest beneficiary, in my opinion, of the influence of the pass game is going to be Kyron Williams.
But I do think Tyree will be in the backfield. Yeah,
right. But I do think we will see Chris Tyree get the ball more, just like we saw in the game on Saturday when they had that play where he ran that pivot route, cleared open. I think we're going to see stuff like that. Because if you can get Chris Tyree on a little crossing route where he's got to step on a linebacker or safety, it's going to be a big play because that guy ain't catching him.
Right. I agree. All right. KMA Preston, if, which I imagine he will, commits to Notre Dame, how many silent commits will ND have left?
I'm not answering that one.
They want you to answer it. That's why I'm
not answering that one. Nope, I'm not answering that one.
Well, Jason answered it. He said 2, and then Jonathan said maybe 3. So there you go. There's some answers for you.
Yep, I'm not answering that one.
All right. Michael's got a question.
Look, so if Holden Staes commits to Notre Dame tomorrow, we'll be back for a show. Well, I will. I don't know what your baseball schedule is like. I think you have a game tomorrow, right, Vince?
If he commits at 5 o'clock, it'll be about the 5th inning.
Okay, so Vince won't be there, but I'll be there talking about that commitment if it happens. And Preston, ask me then, and I'll answer the question then.
Oh, look at that. I like that. Little to be continued. All right, Michael's question. Hey, Brian and Vince. And a capital Y in the middle of your name. That's awesome.
Yes, Mike's my guy. Mike's been friends for a long time. He took on that Brian with a Y thing, and he's making sure everybody knows it's Brian with a Y.
I think it's hilarious.
My dude.
With Irish invasion happening this summer, I'm anticipating the camp to be taken to a whole other level with Elson at recruiting coordinator. What are you hoping to see from a recruiting perspective?
I mean, okay, this is going to sound very anti-Notre Dame. Meaning anti-Notre Dame as far as like history, but I want to see it. I want to see it kind of be sort of like how do I say this? I want to see it be more of an event. I want to see, if they had like a band on campus playing, I would not have a problem with that. Like that's what I want to see, man. Like, I want it to be like, man, just pull out all the stops. Don't just have like the football camp and the presentations, which they've done a good job. I mean, look, Irish Invasion has been a productive thing for Notre Dame.
It has. Yeah, I agree.
The kids getting to work out and they sit down, they watch film with them. Here's your role. And all that stuff is fun. But I would like to see it have a little bit more fun with it. Have a band out there as the kids are walking around. There's a band playing for a couple hours or something like that. You know what I mean? Or, have a bit, make it, you have to be careful about the recruiting. It can't be like official visits and stuff that weekend. But I would have some fun with it because I would imagine it's going to be mostly 2023 players that they're targeting because the 2022 guys are kind of they already know who they have. Sure. There may be some guys trying to fight for a scholarship or up their place in 2022, but I think it's going to be a big 2023 push. And I'd like to see it where it's sort of in a big event. If you want to have, I don't care, man, fireworks, whatever. I don't know what that would be, but I want it to be fun. I want it to be an event, not just a camp in a recruiting thing. I want it to be an event. That's what I do. And I expect we'll see some stuff like that.
I remember seeing the picture on Instagram that had the different weekends that they had planned through June. Is there an Irish Invasion specifically? Because I know they had multiple dates on there. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Online, it's supposedly they have an Irish Invasion thing on Notre Dame's website for June 6th.
Okay,
but I don't know if that's necessarily this year's or if that was last year's, and it just they haven't taken it down. So sometimes those things can be a little bit
I'll look for that.
Outdated. But I think the one online is for last year, and they just haven't updated it yet. So I don't know. I didn't know that there was definitely an Irish Invasion this summer. I didn't know that
they're doing happening. Something, and I need to look into it. They're absolutely doing something because there's major talk on the campus. If football gets to have their recruiting camps, how come nobody else can?
Know what my answer to that would be? Because football program makes us hundreds of millions of dollars, and you don't.
I get it, but that very small amount of money goes into my pocket, so I need them to all have camps.
I got you.
Anyway,
Well, no, don't worry about that because we'll just have more. We'll have more videos, Vince, and you can be part of those videos, and we'll make some money.
Well, I'll still be part of the videos. Don't worry.
Okay.
I'll just do them from different places on campus. Okay. That's all. It'll be more fun. All right, Matty K. I know we're all high on Jordan Johnson. Kid is a great athlete, but his transfer opens up reps and playing time for other guys like Watt, Styles, Colsey when he gets on campus. Your thoughts on this?
Not necessarily. I mean, what reps are they going to give to those players? Jordan Johnson was mostly working with the second and third team, the same group that those guys were on. So this isn't like a situation where, a starter graduated or transferred, and now there's reps with the first team to be had. Part of the frustration that Jordan Johnson had, and I'm not commenting on the right or wrong. This is just answering the question. Part of the frustration Jordan Johnson had, whether you agree with him or not, was he wasn't getting the opportunity with the big boys, right? He wasn't getting that kind of playing time. Well, him leaving doesn't open up that playing time for somebody else. So I don't think it necessarily opens up playing time. Now, it is one less talented player to get reps to, and that part of it is there where Watts or Styles and as we talked about early, Deion Colsey could definitely benefit from it. I think Xavier Watts could benefit from it because for some unholy reason, Notre Dame was having Xavier Watts play the W position this spring, which makes no sense to me. And so now, maybe you can say, hey, let's give him a shot over at the X along with Styles and give him that opportunity.
Just to follow up on the camp discussion, Notre Dame football is having it says Notre Dame football Irish Rising, and they have camps slated for June 3rd, 8th, 10th, 15th, 17th, 22nd, and 24th. So basically every Tuesday and Thursday almost of June. So I'm guessing those are just, one-day camps. You come in, you do your thing. So I don't know that any of those are specifically Irish Invasion, but it's open to any and all entering 9th through 12th grade. So I'm sure there's more details on that to come. So I don't know if there's a specific Irish Invasion, but I just wanted to follow up on that. Okay, Richard. Guys, I'm so thirsty to get a big win. It's not even funny. Guys, let's be honest with ourselves. The Clemson win, while beautiful, is now tainted because of Notre Dame getting the brakes beat off of us later in the year. I agree with that. I mean, look,
I know Notre Dame, of people don't want to hear that, but he's right.
But he's right. Look, I was on the edge of my seat. I was jumping up and down in my living room while that first Clemson game was taking place. It was a good football game. No question about it. But you have to take a step back. And we talked about this when it happened. You have to take a step back and understand they didn't have three of their best defensive players. And when those three guys were back on the field.
The number one pick in the draft.
Well, I was going to get to that. So
make sure you forget about that one.
Well, and the reason I was going to get to that second was because, look, the kid who played pretty darn well. I mean, he had
put
a
up
bunch
numbers.
Of yards.
That's different than playing really well.
You're right.
In my opinion.
You're right. But my big thing was the defense. The defense handled Notre Dame's offense in the second game, and that was the major difference for me. And you're right; they got the brakes beat off of them, and it does taint that win. While exciting, while somewhat unexpected, it's tainted. I agree.
More so even more so from a recruiting standpoint, because if you're battling Clemson for a kid, Notre Dame can't say, hey, look, we beat him at our place in November, because Clemson can just say, hey, we didn't have Trevor Lawrence, we didn't have these three guys, this, that, and the other, and then we beat the mess out of them on a neutral field. I mean, it to me, it was still a big win, right? And
great
so
win, yeah.
To Richard's point, I don't take that away like all of a sudden I don't count it as a big win. It was still a big win. As we said at the time, did you beat the number one team in the country that night? No, you didn't. Did you beat a top 5 to 8 team that night? You absolutely did. Absolutely did.
Yep.
So it's still a big win, but from a perception standpoint, no one at ESPN is saying, well, but they did beat them in November. No, they're all saying, yeah, but when it mattered, they beat your butt. And Notre Dame can't win on the big stage.
Right.
And, that's the reality of it. And unfortunately, to Richard's point, there's no games like that on the regular season schedule this year, in my opinion.
Right.
Beating Cincinnati, I don't care if Cincinnati's the number 5 team in the country. It's still Cincinnati. It's just not going to carry the same weight. Wisconsin, North Carolina, USC are just not those programs. It's going to have to come in the postseason, either in a playoff game or you get to the Orange Bowl or the Sugar Bowl against one of those powerhouse teams and you beat them. I mean, that getting to a game where you beat a number 8 ranked Iowa State team is not going to get the job done. Let's just say if Iowa State's as good as people say they are.
Sure.
It's going to have to be Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, or Georgia on a big stage.
So Brian, 247 Sports came out with the top 10 games that will shape the playoff race. Did you see this by chance?
We talked about that yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I apologize. Yeah. Notre Dame's in 4 of those, which blows my mind. Right. Basically, if Notre Dame loses, it shapes the playoff race. That's what that tells me.
Or if Notre Dame wins, because the one with Cincinnati is there because Cincinnati is going to have a chance to get a marquee win to be a group of 5. Sure. A group of 5 team to make the playoff has to do 2 things. They have to go undefeated, which is not true of Notre Dame, despite what everybody says. And then number 2, they need a marquee win. I mean, UCF has gone undefeated and not made the playoff. Beating Notre Dame would be a marquee win for Cincinnati. And that's why that game was listed there, not so much of if Notre Dame beats Cincinnati. But to the point, your point though, Vince, none of those 4 games are program-defining wins. Wisconsin's not a program-defining win. USC's not Notre Dame beats USC consistently now. And beating North Carolina is not a program-defining win. Those are big for the 2021 season and their playoff chances and all that kind of stuff. But what Richard's talking about is that big win that, like, let's just say North Carolina goes 11-1 and Notre Dame's the only school that beats them. It's still not a program-defining win because it's still not going to be considered you beat one of the big boys.
Sure.
That's what Notre Dame has to do. Notre Dame in the last – going back to 2012, if you look at Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia, Notre Dame has, 2 wins over those teams, right? You beat Oklahoma in 2012 and then lost to them next year, so you're 1-1. You're 0-2 against Bama. You're 1-3 against Clemson. You're 0-1 against Ohio State. You're 0-2 against Georgia. You say, well, you're 2-0 against LSU. Neither one of those LSU teams are any good. And it's just a fact.
Yeah, no, you're right.
That's they have to start winning some of those games.
All right, recruiting question about 2023 quarterbacks. Do you think we have a shot at the 23 QB Nelson? And if we do, how good is he? And then Shane kind of follows up. Where does Notre Dame stand in recruiting quarterbacks in 23? And he just offered Nelson, but it seems he's trending to Oklahoma.
Oklahoma and USC are the 2 players for that one. Notre Dame's not going to be a player there. I don't see it. Things would have to change from where they are now for them to be a player. The 2023 class is absolutely loaded at quarterback. And Notre Dame could get the 6th or 7th best quarterback in the class and still get a stud. And it's kind of like with Tyler Buchner. I mean, Tyler Buchner was not a top 5 quarterback in his class. That's how loaded that class was. Now, part of that was him not getting to play as a senior.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
But he was never considered the number 1 quarterback in the class or the number 2 quarterback in the class. But it was a very, very deep quarterback class. There were kids that were ranked higher than him that I would not trade Tyler Buchner for. And the 2023 class is very similar. Now, you have to make sure you get one of those difference makers in order to be successful. But Malachi Nelson is he's tall, he's skinny, got a really live arm, throws off platform a lot. I compared him a lot to Pat Mahomes, not from an arm strength standpoint because he's just a sophomore and his arm isn't nearly as powerful. The ball doesn't explode, but I mean he can change his arm speed, he can change his arm angles, he doesn't always have to have his feet set to throw accurately down the field. That is a rare trait. Most kids really need to have their feet set, Vince. This to be accurate quarterbacks.
Oh, yeah. The
guys that can not have set feet and consistently be accurate throwing the football are a rare breed, and Malachi has some of that. Now, he doesn't have a powerful arm yet, but he's a 180-pound sophomore in high school. That'll come. I mean, he's a very talented kid. But, there's Dante Moore. There's another kid out there in California. I can't pronounce his name at all. Big-time kid. There's Ricky Collins, Louisiana, that's very talented. This is a really, really good quarterback class. And there's still kids that I've heard great things about that I haven't watched yet. We will do that Wednesday night, by the way. That is going to be the topic of our Wednesday night recruiting podcast next week. It will be 2023 quarterbacks. I'm going to try to figure out who are some guys on the board. We're going to dive into some film, talk about different players, and so everybody can kind of have an idea of who are the names that we need to know about right now.
Here's a fun one from John. He wants to know who will be Notre Dame's best player in space in 2021.
That's an easy answer for me.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I like all these guys.
It's Kyron.
Personally.
It's Kyron for me. Here's why. All those guys can do damage in space. And it's a different kind of space. But when someone says to me best in space, I don't think about the guy that can outrun people in space because you can't always do that. You're not always going to have the
Lindsey's not a guy in space for me.
To me, Tyree's not that guy either. Like Tyree has cutting ability, but he's not like Reggie Bush shaking people. He is a one cut and boom go kind of guy. Keys can be that, but to me, Kyron's combination of he's really powerful with his lower body.
Yeah.
That he can run through arm tackles. But we saw last year, Vince, there were times when teams had him squared up in the backfield and he just leave guys grasping for air. Right. Now you start getting him in space and letting him do that in space. I go back to what he did to Nolan Turner in that first carry of the first touchdown run against Clemson. Nolan Turner has an angle. He has him in his sights. And he just puts a quick move on him and embarrasses him.
He wasn't even close.
And that's a good football player. I mean, he's an experienced, veteran, smart football player, and he made him look like a kid that should be on the JV at, somewhere else. I mean, and he did that a lot. I mean, Janarius Robinson from Florida State, who got drafted this weekend, had Kyron Williams dead to rights, firing, just screaming off the edge, and Kyron just made him miss real quick and beat him. Yeah. He's not the explosive athlete, like speed-wise, that Lindsey and Tyree are, but his suddenness and his change of direction and those type of things is as good as anybody Notre Dame has, if not better. And then when you combine that with those thick legs that he can just run through cornerback arm tackles, to me, he's Notre Dame's best player in space. He's definitely their most proven player in space.
You convinced me. I agree.
Brian 1, Vince 0.
Yeah, no kidding. You had to really circle that, didn't you? Thanks.
Wanted to emphasize the 0.
Yeah, you really did. Omar wants to know, in reference to your article on Hamilton's mock draft projections, other mocks have Slovis and Ritter in round 1. Could this schedule turn out to be tougher than expected?
Well, I think this is a challenging schedule. I just don't think this is Murderer's Row schedule. I mean, This is a good schedule.
This isn't next year's schedule.
North Carolina is a top 25 team. USC has a chance to be a top 25 team. Cincinnati's going to be I think Cincinnati's a little bit overhyped as a top 10 team simply because they're not a top 10 team if they're playing in the Big Ten or the ACC or the SEC. I mean, let's just be honest. But they are arguably the best group of 5 team. No question. They have a lot coming back. It's going to be a challenging schedule. Wisconsin's going to be a good team. I think Georgia Tech's getting better. I think there's some quality teams in the schedule, but none of those teams are Georgia. None of those teams are Alabama. None of those teams are Clemson or Ohio State. So, and that's what Notre Dame used to start the season with. It was a bunch of top 10 to 12 teams. So it's not Murder's Row, but it is a challenging schedule. I mean, even some of the teams that aren't great on the schedule are good football teams. I mean, we're not even talking about at Florida State being a talented, a tough game. It's a game Notre Dame should win, but they're going to have some athletes. Purdue is going to have arguably the best offensive mind of anyone Notre Dame's going to face this year. And now all those freshmen and sophomores that got their butts whipped the last couple of years are now going to be juniors and seniors.
Sure.
And so, David Bell is going to be – David Bell from Purdue might be the best receiver Notre Dame's going to face this year. George Karlaftis from Purdue might be the best defensive end that Notre Dame's going to face this year. So there's going to be some dudes there. And so it's a challenging schedule. It's just not what Notre Dame has done in the past. To his point, Slovis is to me, I don't see it yet. And everyone says, well, he completed 70% of his passes. So did every other quarterback that's ever played in that offense. Look, this isn't USC running the West Coast pro-style offense, right? This is an offense that is geared towards completing those type of passes.
Absolutely.
Anthony Gordon in 2019 in the same conference, the Pac-12, completed 71.8% of his passes, threw for over 5,500 yards and 48 touchdowns in the Pac-12. Do you know who drafted him? Nobody. Because it's the system.
Right, absolutely.
Right? And so, Keaton Slovis is a good football player, and maybe he eventually develops into a first rounder. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I just don't see it. I don't see to me, he completed 67% of his passes last year and threw 7 picks in 6 games. And then I watch a lot of those passes are those dink and dunk throws I just don't see it. I just don't see what other people see as far as first round player. Now, could he get to that point? Yeah, sure. I'm not going to write it off, but to me, I just don't see. And Desmond Ritter is a very talented quarterback, but that's more on his tools, big arm and those kind of things.
Right.
He still has development to do as a quarterback, and that's why I was glad he came back. For Desmond, I was glad he came back instead of going pro because I think he's a guy that you could see make a big jump this year in the execution of the offense, because there are times last year where you could start to see that light go on, and maybe that's what we see from Keaton Slovis. And then also Sam Howell from North Carolina is considered a guy that could potentially be the number 1 overall draft pick.
Right.
That's absurd to me. Sam Howell's a really good quarterback, but that simply says more about the era that we're in than it does about him being the best player in college football. It's just this absurdity of this overvaluation of quarterbacks, because the NFL, as the NFL continues to get worse at evaluating quarterbacks, they start making more and more mistakes at quarterback, which is why you saw Zach Wilson go number 2, which is why you saw Mitch Trubisky go number 2, which is why you saw flipping Christian Ponder was a top 20 NFL draft pick. So I don't think the NFL is the best evaluators of what makes a great college football player when it comes to being a quarterback.
All right, so Omar's going to help me transition here. He goes, Vince, I swear that bell's going off in here every time. And there's going to be a bell here very soon for me. So I got to roll. It is 2 o'clock. The hand is straight up. Again, everybody, thank you. I love my Friday mailbags. I love hanging out with Brian and the IB family. So thank you very much. Do you see where we're at, Brian? I think Richard's question is probably next.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Guys, I will see you next week when we will be right back doing some live stuff. And hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks a lot.
All right, Richard, let's dive right into your question. We're going to knock these out. I have a lot of faith in Tommy Rees, but there has to be some source of his inspiration for the updated offense. Please tell me it's Sark. I don't think that's it. I think you have to understand Tommy spent a year in the NFL. So as an offensive assistant, so he saw some certain things from the NFL. He had to evaluate NFL film at that point in time. I think all great minds to me are very curious minds. It's kind of like, hey, I think I like what we're doing, but I want to see what other people are doing. And I would imagine that Tommy Rees learned some things from what he saw from Steve Sarkisian leading up to that game. And I would certainly study that film afterwards. But there are some things that Alabama's going to do that you're going to say, yeah, we can't do that. We don't have that kind of line to be able to do those type of things. And there's some things that you can adopt and that you can take from what they're doing. And so I would imagine Sark is part of it. But I think a lot of it's things that you're seeing from a lot of people. I think there's things he can learn from Clemson. There's things he can learn from Ohio State, who runs a very different offense from Clemson. Clemson and Ohio State run extremely different offenses. And I'd say Ohio State's kind of in the middle of Clemson and Alabama. Alabama's more of a pro-style offense, where Ryan Day has sort of a pro-style passing attack with a bit of an air raid type of running game. And I mean air raid like the Lincoln Riley type of air raid, which is a much better version of the air raid than what Mike Leach does if your goal is to win a championship. And I have great respect for what Coach Leach does, because it's sort of it's kind of like the option in that it can be a talent negator to some degree, but it's not going to get you all the way there. So that I just think it's just overall just seeing the trends of the game and then taking a little bit of what this team does and what that team does that fits what we believe in, and adopting those principles. But it always has to come back to what you believe in as a football coach. Dylan often says, all in all, can't say I hate BK or what he's done in his tenure at Notre Dame, but at this point I feel like the more involvement control that Tommy and Marcus have, the better it is for the program. Thoughts? So I think that if you look at where Notre Dame was before Brian Kelly got hired, and you look at where the program is now, the fact is we're now ticked when Notre Dame doesn't win championships. And some fans aren't even ticked about that. They have been so conditioned to accept 10-2 and 11-1 and the 12-0 regular season where you get your butt kicked in the postseason, because they still have PTSD from the 1995 to 2009 seasons, where Notre Dame, if you went 9-3, it was almost like you're jumping for joy and it's just this miracle season. Brian Kelly has so incredibly raised the bar. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, Dylan. If you weren't able to watch the show, I'd encourage you to go back and get it, because someone named Audrey asked a question, and I thought it was a great question about, you don't want Brian Kelly involved in the offense. You don't want him involved in the defense. So what does he do? I think Brian Kelly needs to be very involved with both sides of the ball in regards to, you set the demand and then let the coaches carry out that demand, but then you have to make sure you're involved and you're part of that. And look, Brian Kelly won 2 national championships at Grand Valley State, which got him a job at Central Michigan. He then went and won 10 games at Central Michigan, which got him the job at Cincinnati. And he had absurd success at Cincinnati, which got him Notre Dame. You don't have that kind of sustained success if you're not a really smart football coach. I think the problem with Brian Kelly has been, especially in recent seasons, is he's so much more involved and interested in non-coaching things that it distracts him from being the hands-on coach that he was when he was doing all of those things. That's fine. But if that's going to be happening, you also have to make sure that you're giving more power and authority to make football decisions to the coaches that are in the trenches every single day. And then what Brian Kelly's role needs to be is sort of the overseer. It's being involved in the recruiting meetings consistently, knowing what's going on, getting regular checkups from your analysts, from your recruiting coordinator, from different people to say, hey, look, who's doing a great job? Who's not doing a great job? Who do I need to bring into the office and have a come to Jesus moment with when it comes to the success they're having in recruiting? Being able to look at your program as a CEO, and what does a CEO do? A lot of people take that as like it's an insult to call him a CEO coach. No, any successful CEO is going to look at all the different parts of his company and say, boy, we're having great success in this part. We're having great success over here. We're having okay success over here, but this part over here, for some reason, we're below budget. We're over budget. We're not producing the inventory that we're supposed to produce, despite the fact we're spending more money. What's going on there? Let me go figure that out. Let me find some answers. Well, that's the same way with a football coach. So let's just say that Brian Kelly hired me as an advisor, which somebody brought up a couple weeks ago, which I think is hilarious. He said, hey, let's sit down and talk about this area. Where do you see us as not living up to the standard of other programs? And they say, okay, coach, here's how I see it and you see it. This case, this, that, and the other. And then he would say, okay, well, why? Why are we not producing young playmakers at receiver like other programs? Why is our quarterbacks regressing the longer they're in our program? Why are we not, producing the high-level DBs, the first and second round draft picks? And then you have to identify reasons why. Some of those things are going to be correctable. The receiver part is correctable. The quarterback part is correctable. The DB part, maybe that's not as correctable. Maybe you can't just say, hey, look, we are not able to recruit. We have tried to recruit big-time players. We've done this, we've done that. And there's nothing we can do. Okay, fine. Then our focus there is going to be on, we're going to keep trying to produce the Julian Loves and the Troy Prides and the Nick McLeods, but we got to make sure that we're doing really good on the defensive line. Can we raise that up another level to kind of carry that other part? That's what a CEO coach has to do. Hey, we're not going to be as good here, so we got to really make sure we're good over here. And I think those are the things that Brian Kelly has to be involved in. And I don't want him less involved in the program. I want him involved in different ways. And part of that is allowing Tommy Rees to run the offense, to kind of put his DNA on the offense, not kind of taking what Brian Kelly likes and doing it. If you hired him to be your coordinator and you have the faith in him that you say you have in him, and you decided he was the better option than Joe Moorhead or Todd Monken, then you need to have enough faith in him to allow him, especially now that he's got a year under his belt, to go coach, to put his stamp on the offense in every way possible from a practice standpoint, but then also let him know that, hey, Tommy, my door's always open. And then because of that relationship, then it can be Coach Rees going to Coach Kelly with questions, or, hey, here's how we're doing. And, hey, Coach, we're struggling here. And then allowing Coach Kelly to say, okay, well, have you thought about this? And I think those are things that Coach Kelly could do wonders in. And I think that's what he can do as the head coach to get this program to the next level. But let's not act like it wasn't him that made the decisions to get Notre Dame to this point to begin with. And I think we need to give him a lot of credit for that, but we can also hold his feet to the fire a little bit and say, yeah, that's all great, but now it's time to take that next step and do what you got to do to the next step, and that is do on offense what you did on defense, which is give up control. Jason Rose, I'm glad you asked this, so Jason, you asked this question on a chat yesterday, and I asked you to bring it to the on the YouTube channel yesterday, and I asked you to bring it in the chat. I think this is a great question. Do you think Williams and Tyree could have a Javonte Williams and Michael Carter impact? And my answer is I sure hope so. And this is a perfect example to his question of why there is no excuse for Notre Dame not to be a dynamic offense this year without offensive linemen. North Carolina has a bunch of offensive linemen that are not going to be high draft picks. They didn't have a bunch of offensive linemen that were all Americans last year. The raw talent of their offensive line is not elite. They scheme their way into success, and they do things to allow their talented players to be effective. The RPO aspect of that offense is a huge, huge benefit to their run game. When you look at the success that Notre Dame or that North Carolina had running the football last year, we all think Kyron Williams is a great player. At least we should. I think he was great last year. Kyron Williams averaged 5.3 yards per carry. Michael Carter, who I don't think is as good as Kyron Williams, averaged 7.98 yards per carry last year. Javonte Williams averaged 7.26 yards per carry last year. Both in just 11 games rushed for at least 1,140 yards. That's what Javonte Williams had, and Michael Carter had 1,245 yards last season. Michael Carter also caught 25 passes. Javonte Williams caught 25 passes. So 50 catches between the two of them as well. And a lot of it is scheme-driven. It's tempo. It's aggressive. It's RPOs. It's what I like about North Carolina's run game is it's not just inside-outside zone and occasional counter. It's they're going to wrap, they're going to pull, they're going to kick out, they're going to do things to try to influence you. And when you wrap and pull, and I'm personally a zone guy. I prefer zones. But I think the teams that have been able to adopt zones but then implement some of the gap scheme stuff into it have been effective. And what that means is a gap scheme is essentially a zone is, we're going to work together in a combo. We've got this zone. We're blocking B gap up to the second level. Or depending on the call, you may be solo and then I'm working with a tackle. But we're working in tandem to occupy zones. And then the running back is going to have the freedom to make a read and then determine where he's going to go. Gap schemes are geared more towards creating a gap. So you may have a tackle down block to try to create the inside wall of a gap. And then you have a kick out that tries to set the outside wall of the gap, and then you might have a guy pulling inside to sort of be a lead blocker. It's a completely different type of system, and some of the advantages of that in a run game is the more that you do stuff where your linemen are going this way, the more flow you get from the defense, which then opens up those pull and throws. It also opens up even bigger cutback lanes at times if you have that kind of running back. If you're a vertical-oriented team, you can then get to the edge because there's things that teams will start kind of looking for the cutback. And then if you have the talent to outrun them to the sideline, which I think Notre Dame does, it just creates more vertical creases than what you see from a zone team. A zone works if you have really talented linemen. But I think when you have a less experienced or less talented line, the zone can be problematic when you're playing better teams because now it's more about my guys versus your guys, where gap schemes can be, you can protect guys that aren't necessarily great one-on-one players by scheming them up. At least that's my impression of that. So that's why I talked earlier, Jason, about how I would like to see Notre Dame nuance their run game a little bit to create less pressure on just the lineman coming off and being dominant at the point of attack. And I think we'll see that. And then that creates opportunities for bigger plays in the RPO game as part of it. So do I think they could have that kind of impact? Absolutely. Maybe even more so. Do I think that's necessarily going to manifest itself in the same raw numbers as those guys? Maybe not, but I sure would like to see it. I just don't know if Notre Dame's going to be – I don't know if Notre Dame is going to be a team that is going to run for kind of have the just the raw volume of plays and opportunities that North Carolina is going to bring at people. And so I think that's part of it too. And, so I could see a scenario in which their impact is certainly there, if not better, but I just don't know if it's going to look the same numbers wise. That's kind of where I'm getting at. And I think the tempo part of it that North Carolina does helps a lot too. And Notre Dame doesn't really do that. Okay, John Clement says, love the 200-yard a game explanation. Thank you. I think another part of that is Lindsey Davis getting runs or screens as well. Yeah, I mean, look, the more weapons you have to attack teams with on any given play is important. And it's just one of those things that kind of frustrates me sometimes because there's some people that just don't understand nuance and they look at headlines and can't see past that. So I wrote an article recently where I said Notre Dame has to change how they use their tight ends. If you read the article, the explanation was when you're in 2 and 3 tight end alignments, you have to use those second and third tight ends more in the pass game. Otherwise, teams can say, well, when Brock Wright's in the game, we know he's not running a route. And if he does run a route, they're not going to throw him the ball. And so that's one less guy you have to worry about covering. And then if your running backs and your second tight end also aren't used as routes, I think I saw of Tommy Tremble's snaps last year, he ran a route on like 37% of his routes, whereas the year before it was like 48%. Michael Mayer was over 50%. Well, that means as a defensive coordinator, I know that 24 is not going to be used that much as a route runner, especially as you got deeper in the year. And the stuff he is going to be used on is like crossers and simple routes like that. So it makes it easier for me to defend him. So you can't. So saying, well, Michael Mayer caught 42 passes. I'm not talking about Michael Mayer. I'm not talking about the number one tight end. That Notre Dame's as good as anybody at that. I'm talking about when you're using different personnel groupings, you need to make sure that all those guys are legitimate weapons. You have to do that in the modern era. You can't have two guys in a route all the time or three guys into a route all the time. Well, same thing in this. What you're talking about, John, is if you're gonna have Lawrence Keys and Avery Davis and all these guys on the field, they have to be legitimate weapons to touch the ball and get the ball in space and make plays all the time. To where if you're running a buck sweep over here to the right, and you've got Keys, or you have Lindsey, or you have Tyree, or one of those playmakers running a bubble screen the opposite direction, that puts such a burden on that backside safety linebackers. Okay. And this is why the RPOs are so important. So what happens is if I'm running a buck sweep, and a buck sweep, if you want an example, is it's similar to if you remember the Josh Adams touchdown run against North Carolina, just think of the touchdown run that Chris Tyree had against North Carolina, against Clemson. So like an outside type of play where it's a hard flow. It's a fast flow. So outside zones and buck sweeps are considered fast flow plays, whereas an inside zone is a slow flow play, meaning you got to get out as a lineman. You got to go. Well, when that's happening, the guys that are reading run have to flow with it. Otherwise, you're going to get sealed and get beat to the outside. So when you're also running an RPO backside, well, if you don't run an RPO backside, what that does is that allows once the backside safety and the backside linebacker declare run, they can then squeeze from their backside angles and take away any cutbacks. If you're running an RPO behind it, if that backside linebacker and backside safety read that buck sweep and they flow with that fast flow of the line and they move with it, then you pull and you're throwing that bubble screen or that slant or that outcut or that post route, you're now banging that behind them. And that's where the RPO does. And if you're successful with that, and they have to worry about Lindsey and they have to worry about Davis on those plays, because you've now out leveraged them on the bubble screen side or the quick outside or the quick game side or the post side. If you've now out leveraged them or gotten to a one-on-ones, now you're going to hurt them with that. So then what teams have to do is you'll have to say you're almost playing two types of defense. You're playing run over here and you're playing pass over here. Well, if they're having to respect that bubble screen in the backside post, now you've lost your cutback defenders. And so that is where you can then see those cutback runs to where safeties are now having to squeeze from depth because they had to first defend the run. And now you've got a free safety 10 yards downfield trying to tackle Kyron Williams or Chris Tyree. It's not happening. And so those are why those things are so important. And so, you may run a run play, and they flow backside, and you throw a bubble screen that goes for 20 yards. You say, oh, that's a pass play. Not really, and not in my book. It's, to me, as an offensive coach and as you as a defensive coordinator, we're both looking at that as an outside run play. That's how we're defining it, because that's how you defend it, and that's how you execute it. And so that's why I say those things have to be incorporated. But that's why I emphasize RPOs so much have to be a part of what they do, because to me, that's going to be more effective than trying to get your backside receiver to hopefully chase a safety downfield and make a block on them in space. I think you're going to have more efficient and effective success running those RPOs backside. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that I kind of addressed the comment you made, which I thought was a good one. Nick Jeffer says, adding another quarterback question, what's the strategy with offering Nelson 2 months before his commitment date, while Oklahoma's offer since January, reminiscent of Ty Simpson? I don't get the late push strategy. I agree. I don't have an answer for you. The only thing I would say is maybe they're just getting offers out and they're just now starting their second wave of quarterback offers. They wanted Dante to know, hey, you're a guy we like right now. So, but we're going to have to offer some more guys because you're not committed to us. And now they're starting that push, and maybe we'll see some more quarterback offers to follow it. Or the other part is maybe they've heard some things back. Maybe they reached out and made some phone calls. Say, hey, look, we know that he likes Oklahoma. We know that he likes USC. Is there any chance to get in the game? And they may say, hey, look, He loves Notre Dame. He's a big academic kid. He's willing to take a June visit. So then, hey, let's throw the offer, and maybe we can convince him to take a visit in June. I mean, that could be it too. And say, hey, look, he's gonna visit. He's going to make a commitment. I think somebody said yesterday in the podcast that it was July 18th. Well, Notre Dame's got a whole month of June to try to convince him to come on campus, and maybe that can be a game changer. And maybe they could be the team that gets him, or maybe they can say, hey, look, you like us at least enough to wait. So I don't have a problem with them getting in the mix. I think, as usual, they're a little late, but, hopefully that doesn't pay off, doesn't hurt them too much. But I understand your frustration. Okay. Dylan Hoffman says, in reference to Jason's comment where he talked about Williams, this is Jason's comment. Do you think Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree could have a Javonte Williams and Michael Carter impact? And Dylan Hoffman says, I think that's what I'm most excited for. And I think a lot of people are excited for that. I think there's a lot of excitement about what those guys can be, but if they're just going to run the same run offense that they ran this year, you're just not going to see that success because the line, to me, is not going to be good enough. And even if the line's good, it's not going to be as good as it was last year. I expect Alabama to have a top 5 offensive line again. I don't think it's going to be as good as the one they had last year. Doesn't mean it's still not going to be great and really, really good and all that type of stuff, but it's not going to be quite as good. And the same thing with Notre Dame. I think it'll be better. I think it'll be better than people think, especially if Jeff Quinn does a good job coaching, but it's not going to be as good as it was last year. So you have to do some things to protect it a little bit. And if they do that schematically and with some other different types of things, then I think the running backs could have a big year. Richard Maltby says, I have an extremely weird feeling that Logan Diggs is going to be an absolute monster if my memory serves me right. He wasn't even the premier back on his own high school. Do you see what I see? He was not the premier back on his high school as a junior because they had a senior that went to I think Lafayette or North Texas or something like that. But he still had 900 yards that year. I mean, so and a lot of people will do that. He was, I believe, the premier back this past year because he actually won the state player of the year. I think it was the district or the state player of the year this year for Louisiana over some highly ranked players, including a 5-star or top 100 receiver that's going to LSU. So he certainly was a premier back for his football team as a senior. There's no doubt about that. But in previous years, no, he was not. But I agree with you. I've been very high on Logan Diggs from the minute they got him. I remember when they offered him shortly after, Will Shipley committed somewhere else. And I said, look, I know that we all love Will Shipley, and Will Shipley's a heck of a player. But if Notre Dame lands Logan Diggs, I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over it. I think Logan Diggs could be an outstanding player. And then you add Audric Estime to the mix, and that's a heck of a 1-2 punch. So I really like that group. Well, Michael Morse, what freshman running back do you think could be ready to play this year? I think they both will. I mean, they're both over 200 pounds. They're both instinctive players. They're both working their – I've seen some workout videos from Logan Diggs. His body's already reshaping from what it was. I mean, he is putting in work. I don't know about Audric Estime putting in work just because I haven't seen it, haven't asked. But if you look at the kid, he doesn't look like someone who takes days off from the gym. He's not skipping leg day. Okay, I think we can all agree that's probably not happening. But Michael, I think they both can play this year. I don't know if they both will because they're so loaded already on the roster, at least at the top. But those guys, look, Sebo's going to have to put in work. Chris Tyree can't take days off. Kyron Williams can't take days off because those guys are talented players. Dylan Hoffman says, higher ceiling, Nolan Ziegler or Prince Collie? I've been back and forth on this one. I got asked this last week, and I believe that my answer at the time was Nolan Ziegler. And I'm going to stick with that as a rover. I still go with Nolan Ziegler because I think their athleticism is similar, but I think Nolan's a lot longer. But, I mean, today I say that. Tomorrow I may change my mind. The fact of the matter is they're both really good players. I think Nolan was further along as a junior than Prince was as a defensive player. I think if you look at where they were as juniors, it's Nolan. If you look at where Prince was as a senior and where Nolan was as a junior, it's Prince. Now, the question now is, does Nolan make the progress as a senior sort of like Prince did and take his game to another level and maintain that? That remains a question, and we don't know. All I can do is compare them where they were at the same age. And at the same age, Nolan Ziegler was a better player and a higher ceiling player just because similar athleticism, longer body, more just to me, just a rangier player. Prince Collie got a lot better as a senior. And I liked him as a junior, but he got a lot better as a senior. And so right now, based on their junior film, Nolan, and we'll see what kind of senior production he's going to have a heck of a year to be able to stay on that, that same level as Prince Collie. Nick Jeffers says, going off how you see Burnham, what makes someone a pure Mike versus able to play outside? Purely a question of speed and athleticism. No, so a pure Mike to me is not an insult. It is not someone who, he has to be a pure Mike because he can't run. That's not what I mean. It's more of a pure Mike is that guy that has to do three things. Physically, he has to be strong and physical and aggressive. He has to be able to take on guards and centers and either A, shock them, knock them back, which allows him to get off to the ball. B, to beat them, be strong enough to beat them inside, kind of beat them upfield if you're going to be on a run stunt or if you're trying to attack the ball. And 3, you have to have the kind of frame and power to then, if you are engaged, to be able to disengage and get to the football. Smaller guys have a problem with that. Sometimes, Jonathan Vilma didn't have a problem with that, but he was a unicorn. He was an anomaly. You don't often see guys with I think he was like 220 to 225 pounds. Guys like that normally can't play Mike. And so even like you look at Drew White has to thrive at Mike by his instincts and his intelligence and his speed. He's not doing it by just being able to take on guards all day. So I think to me, when I say pure Mike, I'm talking about that kind of player, that physically strong. Another thing a pure Mike has to be, he has to be incredibly instinctive. He has to be able to not. So there's a difference between reacting and anticipating. Anticipating comes from a combination of really great film study, meaning there's little things that great linebackers will do. Great linebackers will see that an offensive lineman has reduced his splits by this much on a particular play. And they will have studied the film enough because, again, when you're studying your opponent, you get that from behind the line view, so you're seeing the splits. And you can, with your position coach and your coordinator, you may say, hey, look, when the backside guard reduces his splits this much, we know it's a zone, or we know he's pulling, or we know something else. When the right guard sinks his butt in his stance, we know they're passing. And so you can read those things, but then also you just instinctively you can diagnose when as soon as they start to move, I see it and I go. Like it's just immediate. I go. Reacting is more of a, okay, that guy's now pulling. Okay, now I have to go. And it's that split second difference between reacting and anticipating that is the difference between you getting through the line of scrimmage and making a big play or you not. And so when you think of that, you all remember that great play Jalen Smith made against Michigan back in 2014 when he came from the backside, shot through, I think it was the A or B gap backside and tackled a guy in the back, behind the line of scrimmage. It wasn't just his speed that allowed him to make that play. His anticipation was phenomenal. I mean, he was just, as soon as the ball was snapped, he was gone. And not because it was a blitz, because he read it and he anticipated, he knew how they lined up. As soon as he saw the back open up, he knew what was coming and he took off. Other guys that have to read and react, they're going to figure the same thing out, but they're going to figure it out a second later. And a second later means I'm not getting to that guy. And so that's a pure Mike has to be able to do that. And then a pure Mike also, to me, has to be a guy that is at very least good in coverage from a zone standpoint. And so when I see Junior Tuihalamaka, I see a guy that's a pure Mike. And it's not an insult. It doesn't mean he's slow. It just means he has that physicality. He has that aggressiveness. He can disengage incredibly well. His block destruction is really impressive for his age. He's incredibly instinctive and anticipatory, not just reactive. And so that's what I see from him. And he's really good in zone coverage. So that's what I say pure Mike. It's not an insult. I don't know if Josh Burnham's a pure Mike because we haven't seen him do that a lot. And he's also a two-way player. And I think that is kind of taken away from that. There are times when I see that anticipation from him, but he's more upside projection than he is right now. He can step foot on campus and play Mike. And that's why I've said before that I think Junior Tuihalamaka has the highest floor of all the linebackers that they're recruiting. He's the guy that I'm least concerned about. Is he going to be a 2 or 3 year starter? Yeah. Okay. Is he going to be a first round pick? I don't know about that. Whereas I look at Josh Burnham and I say, is Josh Burnham going to be a 3 year starter? I'm not sure about that. If he pans out, is he a first-round pick? Oh, yes, I think he is. And that's the difference between a ceiling and a floor, if that makes sense. And to me, that's what when I see pure Mike, that's what I'm referring to. So Nick, I hope that answers your question. If you have any more, like if it doesn't fully answer it, just ask again and we'll get to it. John Climax says, we all talk about getting the younger players in early. The schedule allows for that this year. Hope we see it, and it would be beneficial in so many ways. I agree with you. Right? And I think some of that too, John, is you have to have a plan for it early on. Like, hey, look, you're playing Toledo this week. You're coming off of a short week. The Florida State game is on a Sunday. You're playing Toledo on a Saturday. This is a week where maybe as a defensive line, you say, we're going to get Rubio and we're going to get, Nana, and we're going to get, maybe Patelho or somebody else. We're going to get them a few more first half reps to kind of ease the burden on our veteran players. Hey, we're going to make sure that Lorenzo Styles gets 10 first half snaps or 5 to 10 first half snaps. Maybe you get Deion Colzie a couple snaps. Maybe this is the game that Kane Barong. Maybe you get him in a little bit earlier. Things like that, where you're working them in with your first team early against the Toledo. You're not going to necessarily do that against against Wisconsin or North Carolina, but against them you can do it. And then if that kid plays well, then maybe you do it again the next week against Purdue. But that's what I think the schedule sets up for nicely, to your point, John. John Malone says, would it Cross be better suited to play 3 technique and Rubio better to play nose tackle? Thanks, Brian. Love the show. Yeah, John, I kind of agree with you. I have always kind of wondered why Howard Cross is so set at nose. And I think part of it is because the depth chart at 3 technique has been so good. But yeah, to your point, I think that I like Gabriel a lot as a nose. And I don't know if he wants to play nose. I don't know if they see him that way, but I think he'd be a monster nose. Because I think if you can have a nose tackle that can be disruptive and get tackles for loss and get sacks and pressure the quarterback and collapse him in the pocket, there's so much value in that. That was one of the things I hated most. Like, I always felt as a quarterback, if you're a fast off the edge, I was a pretty good athlete. I could step in the pocket, I could spin out, I could make you miss. Those guys that came right in my face and just threw, basically brought linemen to me. Now all of a sudden it's like, okay, where do I go? I now can't see anything. My entire vision is affected. Whereas when I'm moving around to get away from an outside guy, my eyes are still downfield. I can still hit a check down. I can still scramble. I can see running lanes. But when that guy's coming right at my face, everything's closed off. I can't see anything. I have to try to to escape outside, but I have lost my read. The read is no longer there. Whereas when I step into the pocket, I may be moving around, but my read is still there. Once I get brushed out from something in my face, I've lost the read, and now I have to find my guys again. And that's why I think it's there. And if Gabriel Rubio could provide that at nose, I think he could be a monster. And as you project the future, I think the best way to get him and Riley Mills on the field together at the same time, and let's say Notre Dame gets Anthony Lucas, to get Gabriel and Lucas on the field at the same time is to have Gabriel as a nose. That's just my opinion. And I think you agree with that. And I think the nose could be loaded this year too. You have Heinisch. If Jacob Lacey can come back healthy, you have Howard Cross. Yeah, I tend to agree because Howard's an undersized kid, but he's really quick off the ball. He's very disruptive. I did not know that Mo was still at IMG. I knew he was for a while, but I did not know he's still at IMG. I'm going to have to maybe might see if we can figure out doing a story or something like that this summer. It'd be a good time. In Between Patients, looking forward to listening later on. Thank you, John, for joining In Between Patients. That means a lot. And hopefully you enjoy the show. All right. Shane O'Shea says, why do you think Southern states seem to produce more recruiting talent versus Northern states? Seem that's many top recruits to come out of. There's not many top recruits to come out of New York. I have no idea. I don't think that's an answer I want to get into. Just because there's so many different things that go into it that could potentially be factors. I mean, one state you're trapped indoors for 4 months because of the weather. The other state you're playing year round. I mean, there's so many different things that go into it. I mean, do you have spring ball or not? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it that, I don't think I could. I think you'd probably get an anthropologist would have a better way to answer that than me. Okay. Here we go. We'll get back to these questions. Sometimes the StreamYard just kicks me down to the bottom for some reason, and then I have to jump back up. So I have to find that. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Black Rush says we need elite quarterback and wide receiver play. The difference between Notre Dame, Clemson, and Bama and OSU is elite quarterback and wide receiver play. Some years, that's true. at receiver. Other years, it's not. I still say Notre Dame's 2018 wide receiver core, Notre Dame's 2015 wide receiver core were absolutely good enough to win championships. The quarterback one is much more legitimate. That's absolutely true. Notre Dame has to get a lot better quarterback. Receiver, I think, has been up and down. I think in 2019 there was enough talent at receiver to be really good. They didn't always use it correctly, but there was certainly enough talent there. 2020, that was not the case, at least as far as who they used. And even then, as we talked about, I have issues with what the staff did at receiver in 2020, but at the same time, there's also some understandableness to certain guys. I mean, you didn't have Kevin Austin hardly at all. Braden Lindsey was never healthy. Braden Lindsey got hurt in camp, eventually got healthy again, and immediately got hurt again against Pitt. He was never the same guy. And so you were down some guys that would have been part of that. But you also have to factor in tight end too. And I know a lot of people don't want to talk about this. Well, Clemson and LSU don't have tight ends that put up huge numbers. Well, Moss was pretty productive, but they also didn't have Michael Mayer. They didn't have Cole Kmet. They didn't have the type of talent at tight end that Notre Dame has. None of those teams have ever had a Tyler Eifert. And so I think that has to factor in when we talk about receivers, because we're talking about the pass game, right? And if you have an elite tight end and really good receivers, it's going to have a similar impact that if you have an elite receiver and good tight receivers and a good tight end. So I certainly think it's impactful. But I agree with quarterback, and I agree with receiver at times. But I look at the future of the Notre Dame receiving core, and if they're not playing at a level that allows Notre Dame to compete for championship with the line talent they have, the back talent they have, and then you have the quarterback talent. If Tyler Buckner's as good as advertised, there's enough talent there to win and compete for a championship. Absolutely. I believe so at those positions. Quarterback remains a different story. Okay, Jason says, I think the Charlotte metro area, just Fort Mill, Rock Hill, Weddington, Waxhaw, will become a Indy hotbed in the next couple of years. Tons of Northern Catholics down here with kids nearing high school age. And I think, Jason, too, this is where the ACC contract has been very beneficial to Notre Dame, because 15, 20 years ago, those kids had no exposure to Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame plays a game a year in North Carolina almost, if not a couple games at times. And then when they're not playing in North Carolina, the teams that are the local state, the local schools, Carolina, NC State, Wake, Duke, Clemson even to a degree, they're playing Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's winning a lot of those games, most of those games. And so this is where I think the ACC has been very beneficial to Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint, because it's given Notre Dame exposure, regional exposure to so many of those kids from the DMV area, which is DC, Virginia, Maryland, and then also down into the Carolinas. So that's why I say more so than DMV, I like to look at the Mid-Atlantic as a whole, because for me, it's Maryland, DC on down to the Carolinas. It is a very important area for Notre Dame. And P-Dub says North Carolina and Maryland very underrated in terms of talent. And to Jason's point about the Catholics and the Catholic schools and stuff like that, but also that's where I've been surprised. The best football in Washington D.C. is basically played at Catholic schools, and Notre Dame's had very little success there. Starting to have a little bit more. Cam Hart's from there. I think that would help if he performs well. Sam Mustipher was from there. DJ Brown's from there, but just not nearly as much as you'd think from there. Okay, Dylan Hoffman, is Notre Dame spending as much time on Bellamy as they are the other secondary guys, Pope, Moore, Winston, and Morrison? Okay, that requires two answers. Okay, on one hand, yes, they are. And that's a good thing. That's called good recruiting. You recruit your entire board. That's what I've said in the past, that not enough coaches are recruiting their entire board. They focus on 2 or 3 guys or 4 guys. And then if you don't get those guys, and now you have to go scrambling, and now you have to play catch up with that next level guy. What I'm seeing more of from this staff, especially on defense, is they're recruiting the whole board. And that is, Bellamy's going to feel like he's their dude. And the 6th guy is going to feel like he's their dude. And the 7th guy is going to feel like he's their dude, even though he may not be their dude. Somebody else is. So, when you look at how they're recruiting Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison, for example, they're recruiting Jaden Bellamy as hard. But I don't think Jaden Bellamy ranks on the same way as them. But they have to recruit him, because if they miss on those other guys, then you need to be able to turn to a guy like him. And I also think that, I was talking about this with Jason actually recently, where Bellamy is a guy that I think also is probably more of a safety in college. And so there's that versatility there. If you don't get Devin Moore, then he's a guy that you could maybe say could fill that role. But you have to recruit him like he matters, because if you wait till you miss on a guy and then try to miss. Then you miss on that guy, and now that's when you start to get into the plan B guys. Jaden Bellamy's not a plan B guy. He's just not as high on the board as some other players. Plan B guys are guys that you're not really recruiting right now, and you don't want to get plan B guys. And so they're doing a much better job of recruiting the whole board. So that is that two-part answer to your question. I hope that makes sense. Nick Jeffers, with the current focus of the staff talking to high school coaches during the dead period, how does a college coach sell to a high school staff of a big recruit? You just basically talk about what you can offer kids. I mean, look, here's what we're doing for these kids. Here's what we're doing. Look, we're looking out for this kid as a whole person. He's going to come to Notre Dame. You see what we're doing on the field. 2 playoff appearances in the last 3 years. Top 10 every year. We're putting guys in the NFL. I think somebody tweeted out, and I haven't looked to verify this, but somebody tweeted out that right now Notre Dame has like the 4th or 5th most NFL players on rosters are from Notre Dame. That's a selling point. But then what you can also tell a coach, especially coaches that actually invest in their young men beyond just football talent. Look, this kid's going to get an education. Here's what we do. Here's our because a lot of coaches are worried about sending their kids to Notre Dame because they don't really know what Notre Dame does. And they're like, my kid is a hard worker in the classroom, but he's not a real, just naturally, some kids are like athletes. I mean, some kids can just show up and be great athletes. Some kids just, you process information in a certain subject better. It's why some kids are better at math or science or whatever. It's like, I don't know. It makes sense to me where I would look at once you started putting letters into math, I was like, oh, screw that, forget that. But other people, you pick it up well. And so, a lot of coaches, they know their kids. Look, this kid has to work really hard, and I'm worried about him going to a place like Notre Dame with the rigorous course load. And so then Notre Dame can say, well, look, hey, that's no problem. And you can say, here's why that's not a problem. We have this tutoring program and this academic advisors, and here's how we're involved with it all the time. And it's beyond the coaches and things like that. And it's okay. Well, hey, I feel really better about it. And then that coach calls another of his coaching buddies, and then they talk about it, and that's how it spreads. But it's just really about what can we do for your kids? And not just with football, but in the whole aspect of it. And that's what Notre Dame is going to sell. And then also there's a level of trust that gets built between coaches. And, it allows you to say, hey, look, as you're advising your players, hey, look, you can go wherever you want. But these 3 schools right here, I know those coaches. I know what they do. That's a great fit for you. And those are honest guys. These 2 guys over here, and they tell everybody that. I think those are the things. All right. Nick follows up, same as pitching to a recruit, system fit, success, or are there different considerations to ingratiating with a staff? Seems like it'd be the most important group to win over behind parents. I think there's a lot to that. And I think the reason this is so important for Notre Dame is Notre Dame is usually talking to coaches who have a preferred regional school. So there's a lot of advantages to a high school coach if his kids go to Texas or Texas A&M and Oklahoma. To send a kid to Notre Dame is going to get you, and it's sad that this way, it's going to get you some criticism. Well, why didn't you send this kid to Texas? Why'd you send him to Notre Dame? And so you have to overcome that. And the better relationship you have with the big time coaches in those areas, the better opportunity you're going to have to say, hey, look, I'm willing to take those arrows because I know that this is the best thing for my kids. That going to a place like Notre Dame is, I can deal with the arrows coming from the community and the boosters and the alums of in-state school, whoever, because I know that this place, this Notre Dame situation is going to be so much better for my kid in 20 years. And my kid meaning my player. And so I think those are aspects of why it's so important to have those relationships as well. You just can't just come and say, hey, we want this kid. And he's going to be like, okay, well, if I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories about how Notre Dame was in great shape with a kid, but the high school coach was pushing him towards in-state U. Consistently happens. But if you're developing those long-term bonds, even times, and they're not just calling coaches of kids that they're trying to recruit right now. They're trying to call the top programs in those areas. So it may not benefit you in 2022, but it may benefit you in 2023 or 24 or 25. And that's why I think it's such a great strategy. Okay. All right, here we go. Oh, Thomas Walsh is great. We're talking about the Irish invasion. Bring in Bon Jovi. He's a big fan. Kid played there. That would be insane. Met him and Jesse and his fam after an indie camp years ago. Dude loved talking Notre Dame football. Great guy. Agree with all of that, but he may be a little expensive to get Bon Jovi to play on your campus. Dylan Hoffman, if Kyron gets drafted next year, does Tyree become the primary back in 2022? Yes, he does. Kids may not know who Bon Jovi is, Omar, but they will learn. Their parents will, and that's the thing. Their parents are going to know who Bon Jovi is, and it's just good music, And that's not even really my genre of music that I prefer. I'm more of I just don't prefer the rock and especially the hair bands thing, but it's still good music. What does they say? Game recognizes game, right? Like some guys, like that's not my genre of music, but I can dig that. Dropping Dimes, I've been in every stream this week. Thank you. Appreciate you being a part of it. We're going to keep them rolling. And don't worry, I'm not going to kick you out of the club if you miss one. Don't worry about it. Let's see here. Kevin McPherson says Cincinnati also has Indiana on their schedule, and if healthy, that could be an influential game, especially considering the talent both teams are returning. I'm not as high on Indiana as some other people are. I think Indiana benefited a lot last year from a close loss to Ohio State. I think the rest of the Big Ten really stunk last year, in my opinion. I don't think Penn State was any good, and they caught some breaks against Penn State. I think Michigan stunk. I think Rutgers stunk. I think Michigan State stunk. I think Maryland stunk. And I think by the end of the year, Wisconsin was a shell of themselves. And then they lost to Ole Miss in a bowl game, lost to Ohio State. I think Indiana's a good football team. I think Indiana's an 8-4 type of team. To your point, however, Kevon, is if you have a win over Notre Dame, who will be a top 10 to 15 team, and then you have over an 8-win Big Ten team, even if Indiana's just kind of an 8-4 team, borderline top 25, that's still going to be a huge resume builder on top of the Notre Dame game. Plus, you're going to have to beat some top 25 teams in your own league because the AAC is a good league. You can't just beat AAC teams. But if you have the wins over UCF and SMU and Memphis and Tulsa, and other top 25 caliber AAC teams, and you have 2 Power 5 wins over one ranked team and one borderline team. And again, I'm taking worst case scenario with Indiana. If Indiana's as good as people say and they're top 15, Notre Dame's top 15 and Cincinnati beats both and goes undefeated, they're a playoff team, in my opinion, unless there's like 5 undefeated teams next year. Okay. Dylan Hoffman says, I have not done enough research on the 2023 recruits yet, but social media, it seems like they are going after a lot of top receivers. Thoughts on it? They are. They've offered a lot of top receivers, but they have to kind of take it to the next step. Dylan D. Hey, Brian. See, Dylan, I think you're taking a shot because you spelled my name with an I. I'm just going to assume the worst and take it that way. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry I made you mad about Jordan Johnson the other day. Dylan, you didn't make me mad. It's just, look, I'm passionate, right? If I was mad, I would not have responded to you. If I thought you were some bad guy or someone that I would not have responded to you. And my comments that I made about this isn't the channel for you were not necessarily about you, but it's more the people that will just come and not have the guts to engage with me and just leave a thumbs down or hit some drive-by comment or throw out some insult. You came at me with a point of view. I embraced it and we discussed it. And I wasn't mad at you. I appreciate it. And I actually kind of like that there are times there are people come in here with different points of view because that's usually what I'm most passionate about is when somebody says something that I don't necessarily agree with. So I'm not mad at you and I appreciate you coming back and I appreciate you joining the show again after I chastise you a little bit, but it wasn't personal. It's just the subject in general. And also your comment was a culmination of reading all these comments from Notre Dame fans ripping Jordan Johnson. Oh, he wasn't working hard enough and he wasn't this and he wasn't that. And I'm like, where's that coming from? It's come from Brian Kelly and other people in the media. They did the same thing to Phil Dracovic. And I despise that because the grown-ups are supposed to be better than that. And when you've got grown-ups, people making a lot of money, basically Notre Dame fans think very little of Jordan Johnson because of Brian Kelly's comments. And I think that's unfair because Jordan Johnson doesn't have the opportunity to go out and defend himself. And if he did, people would say, oh, he's just bitter and all this other kind of stuff. So sometimes I get a little fired up about that kind of stuff and it bothers me, but it wasn't a personal thing. Okay. Richard Maltby says, it really grinds my gears that BC's QB, he who shall not be named, is potentially a projected first round pick. Look, I love Ian Book as much as the next guy, but we all know who had the real traits. I can add nothing to that. Okay. Omar Austin, speaking of the NFL draft, Chris Wenke, EJ Manuel, and Christian Ponder, 3 of the worst reaches ever as far as first round quarterback draft picks. Wonder what they all have in common. And I agree definitely with 2 of those for sure. Okay. Michael says, hey, Brian, are you aware of any 2023 prospects that Notre Dame is in very good position with that would enable them to pass on the 2022 class and who they would possibly be? Thanks, my dude. The second part of your question on that, I don't know if there's any situations where Notre Dame is going to pass on recruits because they like 2023 guys. I think what this does is we talked about quarterback. It's such a loaded year at quarterback that you don't necessarily have to worry about taking a second quarterback if you're worried about Brendan Clark transferring and maybe Drew Pine transferring. You can say, hey, look, we'll take a grad transfer maybe for depth, or, they apparently think Ron Paulus has a future as a quarterback, and then you have Buckner and, you'll have Steve Angeli. Running back is one where I think you say, hey, if we don't get one of these top guys, there's some early offers that they're at least in striking distance with. Say, hey, we're going to turn up the heat there. You look at tight end. There's some really good tight ends that are on the board with in 23, but they're still going to take two now because they're really good players. I think offensive line, you could say, hey, you're not going to take a Pat Coogan type of fifth offensive lineman because you're going to turn it to next year, but you're not going to only take three offensive linemen because of next year. And so I think that's where they're at, Michael, is they don't have to take the project type players. They don't have to take the really low floor, hopefully he pans out type of guys because we need numbers. I think that's where the early start in 23 helps. And I wouldn't say there's guys that they're definitely going to get, but like we talked the other day about, well, do you take 5 linebackers? Well, to me, you don't take 5 linebackers because you look at 2023 and you see Drake Bowen, you see Trey Edwards, you see Malik Bryant, you see Josiah Trotter. You see there's a lot of guys already have offers, and Notre Dame's in good position with at least a couple of those guys, Edwards and Trotter, or excuse me, Edwards and Drake Bowen. You say you don't need to take a 5th linebacker because there's guys equally as good in next year's class. So I think that's where you want to be. That's where Bama is, and that's where Ohio State is Notre Dame has to they have to reach for guys too many times because they've fallen short in numbers in past years, or they need 3 and the third guy, there's no good third players. Now Notre Dame's in a situation where they've recruited well enough in recent years, and they're recruiting well enough in 2022 that we're going to fill our needs with impact players. If for some reason we fall short of those impact players, we're not going to reach to take a numbers guy because we're in a good place next year. I hope that answers your question. Oscar Castaneda says, who do you see Notre Dame actually getting at wide receiver? I know I'm asking you to be a fortune teller, but what's your gut saying? My gut's saying, as I have no clue about Xavier Bradshaw, my gut is saying that right now I think Notre Dame is a good position with CJ Williams. There's work to be done, but I think they're in good position. I did the hot board the other day. Oscar, if you didn't get a chance to see it, go to the YouTube channel, check it out. I basically go over who are the guys I think Notre Dame has the best chance with, who are the guys that I think that they're have growing confidence, and then who are the guys where there's work to be done. CJ Williams is in my growing confidence category. I would put Tobias Merriweather there if I thought he was going to be a summer decision. I like where Notre Dame is at with Tobias right now, but because he's so far down the road, there's a lot more time for other schools to get involved. So I feel good about CJ. After that, and again, feel good about CJ means they're at least in a top 2 or 3 situation where if they can close, they can get him. I'm not saying that they're going to get him. They're a lock to get him. I'm not saying he's in the same boat as the guys that I feel great about. It just means they're definitely in the game for him. Tobias, they're definitely in the game for, but it's a longer way off. Xavier Bradshaw, I have no idea. I know that they're pushing for him, but he doesn't talk much, and he doesn't do a whole lot of recruiting coverage. So I think that I'm less confident with him simply from a lack of information standpoint. Do I think there's a chance that Notre Dame finishes with a very strong receiver class? Yes, I do. And I think with some of these kids, Coach Alexander's stepping up a little bit, which is good, but I also think Tommy Rees is helping a lot with that as well. But, if Coach Alexander can kind of overcome the things I've been critical of him in the past and get going, I think there's kids out there to be had. He just has to get it done. Okay. Sage Wallace says, BK seems afraid to take chances, and that's the problem because you have kids thinking instead of playing. Sage, this is a great comment, and I'm going to share a story with you. There was a period of time last season. I'm not going to say when because I don't quite remember, but it was kind of in the middle of the season where Coach Kelly and Coach Lee had to go to the defense and say, you guys got to stop thinking so much. You have to just go play. You guys have to stop thinking about making a mistake, stop looking over your shoulder, and just go play. and the defense really rallied and played very well over the next several games. And I thought that was great coaching. That's what a great head coach is supposed to do. The reason it worked on defense is because this defense, even though I think Clark Lee put a lot more on the defenders last year than he had in the past, there's still a place where it is just go play, make your decision, make your read, make your checks, and then just go play. And that's a part of what the philosophy was. The problem is offensively, that's just not a part of the philosophy. And you can say it all you want, but it has to be at the core of who you are. And then players are getting away from who you are. And that's when those kicks in the pants or those encouraging words or whatever the things that you're going to say end up then having an impact, because you say, hey, look, this isn't who we are. Stop thinking. Stop being afraid of making a mistake. Just go play. But when your entire philosophy on offense is geared towards not making mistakes, not turning the ball over, not doing this, not doing that, then I can say all I want, hey, let loose and go play. But it's like, yeah, but I can't, because that's just not who we are. And so I think I see a lot of that, especially on offense. It's a very, very good insight. Okay. Sean Rogers asked, how much do you think we see two backs on the field at the same time this year? I would hope that we see it at least 10 to 15% of the snaps in a game. I'd like to see that. I don't know if I'd go too much more beyond that, because there are some limitations to a two-back offense, but I would like to see it at least 10 or 15%. I'd say I wouldn't go more beyond 20. Would be the most I would do. And in some weeks, I wouldn't use it as much. But especially against the better teams, I would like to see about 10 to 15%, maxing out at 20 as far as the percentage of the snaps. And then when you do that, you have to make sure that you're real creative with it. So that way it doesn't just become a formation. It becomes a formation that gets teams it creates a little anxiety with defenses, because that's when big plays can happen. Okay. Sean Rogers, do you think we see Avery Davis, Williams, and Tyree all in the backfield at the same time? That could be scary. So I talked about this, I think it was yesterday's podcast. And honestly, Sean, I'm going to be real with you. Whoever's sitting beside me at games this year, and hopefully it's Vince. We're not sure of what the press box situation is going to look like and how many they're going to allow in. But I'm going to tell whoever's there that if you see Chris Tyree, Kyron Williams, and Avery Davis line up in the backfield together, you need to punch my leg or pinch me really hard so I'm in pain, because otherwise I might stand up and cheer. And they do not allow cheering in the press box. And for over 10 years, I've been very good about that. I've never cheered in the press box. I've only pounded the table once, and it wasn't very loud. But I may cheer if I see that. I may get excited if I see that. So hopefully that's the case. Michael Keeley says from Facebook, Michael, thanks for joining us. Did you see Ty Chan is up to 304 pounds? He also posted a picture, and it's a very athletic 304. That's great news if that's true. Great news if that's true. Now, my question will be, I need to see him move at 304 pounds. But if he's already up to 304 pounds and he has the same athleticism that he showed as a sophomore, then he's going to go from a 3.5-star guy for me, which is like a top 300 to 350 guy, with a 4.5-star upside guy, which is that of a top 50 player. He's going to jump up big time because there's some talent. Here's an interesting question. John A1 says, can Jack Cohn be a Heisman candidate? Okay, this is not a knock on Ian Book. So all the apologists who do the thumbs down every time I say something negative, okay, get out of your feelings and listen to what I'm saying, okay? This isn't a knock on Ian Book. But I think we can all say, if you look at Ian Book's numbers last season, they were not overly impressive. He averaged 235 yards a game passing. He did some good things running, but he averaged barely over one passing touchdown a game. And at 24 touchdowns, he averaged just 2 touchdowns per game. Those are not Heisman quarterback numbers. But he was still a top 10 Heisman finalist because A, he plays quarterback at Notre Dame. B, because they won some big games. They beat Clemson. They beat North Carolina. And he had some good moments in those games. Even though I would argue he was at best their third or fourth best offensive player at best, he's still the quarterback. And the Heisman is primarily a quarterback-driven award, even though we did see a receiver win it this year. So if Jack Cohn is playing in an offense that I believe is going to be more quarterback production friendly, Not saying he's going to be better than Ian Book or anything like that. So get out of your feelings. Not you, John, but there are some people who get real emotional when you say anything other than Ian Book's the next Joe Montana. Okay? Get out of your feelings and understand what I'm saying. It's about the system. Okay? I would take Ian Book over Anthony Gordon any day of the week. Anthony Gordon threw for over 5,000 yards. It's about production. Okay? So if Jack Cohn plays in an offense that is more quarterback production friendly, because of the scheme and the change they make. And Notre Dame is 11-1, 12-0. He's passing for 3,000 plus yards. He has around 30 or so touchdowns. Could I see him being in the Heisman conversation? Yeah, I could. And the reason I say that is because that's happened at Notre Dame in recent seasons. Notre Dame's best skill player in 2017 was a Heisman Trophy contender candidate going into November, Josh Adams. Okay? They didn't have a quarterback that was in there, so it's the next best skill player. We all know who the best player in Notre Dame's offense was, but an lineman's not going to be a Heisman candidate. It's just not going to happen. Okay? I think, what was the last one? Was Orlando Pace the last one that was considered a legitimate Heisman candidate? Then you look at 2020. Ian Book was considered a Heisman candidate. He was in the top, I think he finished in the top 10 in Heisman voting. He threw 15 touchdown passes, right? That's not a lot. But Notre Dame won, and Ian Book had some really good games in big moments. He had some really good moments against North Carolina, made some highlight-type plays, led Notre Dame on 2 early scoring drives when North Carolina was going good, had a big game against Jurkovec on national TV, made some big plays late in the game against Clemson. Those are Heisman moments. That throw where he hit Avery Davis in regulation, that's a Heisman moment. The scramble and then hitting Avery Davis in the end zone, that's a Heisman moment. Tucking it and running and getting in scoring position against Clemson in overtime. Heisman moment. So he had those moments, even though his numbers weren't great. Jack Cohn is going to have a chance to put up better numbers. But here's the other part of it. Jack Cohn gets, as was brought up earlier, he's going to go against Desmond Ritter. He's going to go against Sam Howell. He's going to go against Keaton Slovis. When the college football magazines come out in this summer, I guarantee you, you're going to see all 3 of those kids listed among the 10 top Heisman candidates in the country. I guarantee. I'll be shocked if they're not. So Notre Dame's quarterback is going against 3 quarterbacks where I think we all agree Notre Dame should win those games. If he can put up numbers and outplay those guys, yes, he could be a Heisman contender. Now, would you say he's the best player in the country? No. Is he best quarterback? No. But he is the quarterback at Notre Dame. And as we've seen in recent years, if you're the best skill player at Notre Dame and Notre Dame is winning a lot, you're going to have a chance to be a Heisman Trophy contender. So yes, I would say that is possible. Okay, Dylan Hoffman says, Brian, you said in the previous live session that if Notre Dame isn't going to land a second running back, that they could use that spot for an extra receiver. Would you prefer that, say Merriweather or Singleton? If it came down to that, I would prefer the receiver, just because I feel like running back is a healthier position. If Notre Dame decided right now, look, we're not going to take another running back. We think we can get Bradshaw, Williams, and Merriweather, but we can't do that and take 2 backs, and they made that decision, I'd be fine with that. I would. If they decided they wanted a second back, I'd also be fine with that too. But I think it's a win-win. You give me Merriweather or Singleton or Merriweather Hayden or Merriweather Salchuk, it's a win-win. My personal preference is I would rather take the receiver. I think it's more important to have a dynamic receiver than it is to have a dynamic running back in today's age. It's just my opinion. Okay. P-Dub says, what do you think the next evolution of defensive players will be? I said this the other day. I don't know if you saw this, P-Dub. I think you were in the show. I think we're going to see a return of more Mike linebackers, like pure Mike linebackers. I think we're going to see more of that in the college level. I don't know about the defensive level. I think that the next evolution too is I think we're going to see more and more defenses playing more corners on defense. I think we're going to see that more. Okay, Sean Rogers asks, who gets more touches this year, Watts, Styles, or Colsey? Curious what you and the board thinks. I don't know. I hope it's Watts, because I think Watts is a guy that you can – Watts' skill set is – he's a bit more of a hybrid player, whereas Styles is more of a pure receiver, and he's a very good one. I had Lorenzo Styles as a top 100 recruit. I think Lorenzo Styles is very good. The reason we said touches is because, to me, Xavier Watts is in that Xavier Davis mold where I want to see him get jet sweeps. I want to see him get reverses. I want to see him get screens, as well as just the normal plays down the field. So usually in that type of situation, that guy's going to get more touches. Now, will he be more impactful, better vertical player? Who knows? But in a perfect world, if it was up to me, I would probably get Xavier Watts more touches this year. Down the road, that may change. But for right now, for 2021, that would be it. Thomas Walsh says Estime looks like a freaking Mr. Universe. That's what I was saying. I don't think Audric Estime is passing on leg day or chest day very often. Ryan McCarty, this is a good question. Where would you rank Stace and Raritan in the national tight end rankings? Are they both top 10? So, Ryan, I can't say that specifically because I haven't watched enough of the tight ends in the country to say definitively where they would rank. I can say this, though. As I think back to past years where I have evaluated full classes, these guys are both, for me, would be consistently top 10 tight ends based on where they rank now. And their upside would definitely be so. So are they top 10 in this class? I don't know. I try to not answer questions that I don't really have answers for, and I'm not going to reach. Looking back, they are what I would usually envision as being top 10 tight ends. I think they'd be in the debate for the top 5 to 6, the way that I evaluate, which is more focusing on the upside as opposed to where they are currently. Okay. C says, Coach, I heard on another podcast by a well-known Notre Dame beat writer say the problem with the Johnson transfer was he wasn't really a 5-star, but a borderline 4-star recruit. What did you have him as? My first question would be, did that beat writer also say that when he was coming out of high school? I'd be curious about that. I don't know the answer. I don't know who said that, but I'd be curious to see who said that and if how they evaluate him coming to high school. Because if what you're going by is what you saw him do, well, you didn't see him do anything. We haven't seen any practices with Jordan Johnson. We haven't seen him really get any chances in games. So how can you evaluate that? Jordan Johnson didn't get a whole lot less playing time this past year than what Kyron Williams got the year before, and Kyron Williams is pretty good player, right? So if it's about what he did on the field, then I would just say, I can't agree with that. Miles Boykin made 6 catches his first 2 years. He went on to be a third-round draft pick. That's really pretty good. Regarding to my ranking of him, to say that he wasn't a 5-star but a borderline 4-star recruit, so I assume that meant he might be a high 3-star. I think that's very misguided. And we heard people saying that about Phil Dracovic last year too, remember? We were hearing other Notre Dame beat writers saying that Phil Dracovic wasn't that good, he was overrated and all this kind of stuff. Why? Because of what they were being told by coaches. And that's kind of my issue with that type of take, is it usually comes from there. But in this case, we'll see. I had him as a 4.5-star guy, which is that as a top 50 guy. And that usually means a 4.5-star for me is a guy that's going to kind of rank from 35 to 40 to 60-ish, right? So he's a top 50 caliber player. Could be inside, slightly outside. That's how I viewed him as. And the reason I viewed him that way is because he wasn't ever a burner. He wasn't that explosive vertical player. He was more of a possession guy, more of a route runner, a one-on-one guy. And he wasn't huge. He didn't have a great size. He didn't have great speed. He just was a really good all-around football player. And that's why I say you have to get a guy like that opportunities, because he's not someone that's just going to go out and he's not a Braden Lindsey where you can put him in for 10 snaps and he's going to be impactful because you can do a reverse and jet sweep and things like that. Jordan is more of a guy that needs volume. And that's not a great fit for someone who's just not playing 10 snaps a game. It's just you're not going to see his talent manifest itself that way. You're just not going to see it. Okay. This is interesting. P-Dub, if you look at the years Notre Dame made the playoffs, Notre Dame was the only team without a first-round quarterback. So if you look at 2018, to his point, it was Oklahoma. Kyler Murray's number 1 overall pick. Trevor Lawrence, Clemson, Trevor Lawrence, number 1 pick. And then the other team in 2018 was Alabama, and they had Tua, first-round pick. So you're accurate there. 2020, you had Mac Jones, first-round pick. Trevor Lawrence again, and Justin Fields, first-round pick. So, yeah, to your point. Now, I would argue that not all those guys were necessarily first-round talents. I personally would not have taken Tua in the first round. Again, we're in a different era where quarterbacks are bumped way up based on the value that the position brings, as opposed to it being a direct reflection of who's the best player. Mac Jones to me is not a first round talent in past eras. It is now, but in past eras, he was not. But your point is they certainly played like first rounders and they produced like first rounders. And some of them had elite first round talent. Kyler did, Trevor did, Justin Fields did. So yes, you are correct. Notre Dame has to upgrade at quarterback, and it's not just about production. It's also about talent, but I think production is the bigger thing for me. I don't think you need an elite quarterback, a top 10 pick to win a championship. I don't. If you have enough talent around him and Notre Dame recruits enough talent around him at certain positions, I don't think it's needed. Okay. Okay, so Coach, on a post-Blue Gold game press conference, BK said their senior receivers are playing with a lack of fundamentals. Do you think that means he's aware Dell isn't getting it done? I didn't notice that comment, so I don't want to comment on that. See, I'm going to go back and listen to that again. I drove home during that PC, so I kind of reached it, read it differently because I had to get back to do the podcast, but and I was working on my game observation, so I didn't hear that comment, and I don't want to comment on it without really hearing it specific, like exactly what he said to do that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to wait to see that. Maybe if you ask me again next time, I will have read it then. Sean Rogers says Burnham reminds me of a bigger, longer Kaiser, but could grow into a Mike. Yeah, I don't really see that, Sean, because I think he plays mostly as like a box edge player, where Kaiser in high school is like a free safety. Bigger and longer for sure, but I think he's more of a, to me, if I were to say it, I would say Burnham is more of a longer, bigger Drew White. I think is a better comparison for me. As far as, I think he's got some instincts, and especially as he starts focusing just on linebacker, I think you're going to see that. P-Dub, Indy has the fourth most players in the league. Now, I've seen this going around on Twitter, and that's why I say I haven't verified it yet. Could you tell me who specifically is saying this, like the original source of this? Because I've heard that fourth or fifth, but that would be important. Sage Wallace kind of followed up on an earlier comment. Everyone keeps talking about recruiting like that's our problem. It's not the problem. It's not taking chances, playing way too safe. Sage, I would say there's a middle ground there. I think that you're absolutely right, and we've talked about this here. They need to be more explosive on offense. You can't be so conservative, and it's okay. Sometimes you're going to throw picks, right? I mean, Mac Jones threw a pick early. He was trying to take a chance to a pick early in the SEC title game, right? Tua threw a pick 6 in the title game, and say, hey, that changed that game around and helped Clemson blow them out, sure. But that also led to them being in the title game to begin with, and led to them beating Oklahoma because it was an aggressive, attacking pass offense. Sometimes you're going to get picked off. Right? Sometimes you're going to make a mistake. But if you get too conservative, then not only do you not make mistakes, but you also don't make a lot of plays. And that's why I've said in the past, Notre Dame's offense requires elite receivers because you have to be legitimate one-on-one playmakers. They don't scheme guys open. We were seeing them scheming guys open in the spring game. But I do still think recruiting is important. I think Notre Dame I'll say two things, Sage. One, I do believe that Notre Dame recruits better than given credit for, because I do think there are some biases and some issues when it comes to the recruiting services and how they evaluate, meaning two things. Number one, I think there's a regional bias, not a huge degree because the South produces a lot of the top players, but there is a regional bias, number one. Number two, there's a bias towards, now more so than in the past, there's a bias towards camps and different things like that. And then three, I think there's a bias towards where guys are today, the ready-made players. It's why I think we see them miss so much on linemen and tight ends to a degree too, because a lot of the guys that end up being the best tight ends and the best linemen are guys that were 260, 270 coming out of high school that blew up and developed. And a lot of times I think they focus too much on who's the best player today, not, hey, this guy's as good as he's ever going to be. He's not. He's already jacked up. He's already ripped. He's already a grown man. He's not going to get a whole lot better. Whereas this other guy over here, Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa, who was like 195 when he signed with Notre Dame, is going to get put on 20 pounds and become a monster. And so I do think, but I also think there are areas where Notre Dame does need to recruit better. They do need to recruit better quarterback. And recently more so than in the past. I mean, you signed Ian Book 1 year, Avery Davis the next, and then you have Phil Dracovic, and then then the next year you got Brendan Clark. I do think the quarterback position needs to be more consistently recruited recently. Now, in the past, I thought they recruited plenty of guys. They just didn't develop them. And even recently, Phil Dracovic, that was not a recruiting problem. Tyler Buckner. So they're there, but I do think there's a need for even better. I think Notre Dame needs to recruit better in the secondary than what they have in recent seasons. I'm encouraged that Mike Mickens is going to do that. I think linebacker needs to be recruited even better. I think there's another level for them to go at linebacker, which is why I'm excited about what they're doing in the 2022 class. So I do think there are areas where they can and should recruit better. But I don't think the recruiting gap between Notre Dame and those other schools is as big as other people make it out to be either. I'm kind of in the middle on those two. Okay, here we go. Yes, speaking of thumbs down, because we do get those people in our chats, everyone hit the thumbs up. I would appreciate that. And as Connor says, and yes, like and subscribe, folks. I appreciate that very, very much. Let's see here. Okay, with the rise of JB, will Foskey cross-train at strong side end more? Are they the two best ends? No. I think they're both going to play at drop. Look, Jordan Patelho had a great spring game. You're going to see them play together at times. You're going to see them rotate at times. There will be times that they're both on the field together in those situations where maybe Foskey is a strong side guy, more in like a third down package. But the reality is that Foskey's still their best end. And he's still going to be, in my opinion, the starter. There's more he can do. And number two, I look what they did with Dalen Hayes and Julian Aguara. There's no need to move anybody. Rotate them. Because here's the way I look at it, right? So let's say that they're equal, and you play 70 snaps in a game, give 35 or so to one, 35 or so to another, and then you're going to have 5 or 10 snaps when they're on the field together. So they're both getting 35 to 40 snaps. I would much rather have a 35 snap, each of them at 35 to 40 snaps in the fourth quarter, going against an offensive tackle that's taken 70, 75 snaps, than to put them both on the field and they're both at 55, 60 snaps. Okay, I like this idea. And as Jonathan says in his follow-up, Myron is flashing at strong side. I think they'll end up both using both JB and Foskey at weak side end. Agree. And don't overlook Justin Adamiola. I know that's almost impossible, but I want a rotation in this era of the past where, like, and this isn't towards you, John. This is just a general comment. The era of where you had your starters and then you had your backups is quickly going away. And we've seen that at Notre Dame recently. You know, Julian Aguara was the starter over Dalen Hayes, but they were both very productive and very important players. And they played a lot together and they rotated. We're getting to the point now with defensive linemen especially that it doesn't really matter who the starter is. Who's in the game in the fourth quarter when the game's on the line? And do you have two guys that can make plays? That's what people are looking for. You know, and say you got a guy on first and second down, then you're able to sub on third down and bring a fresh guy on third down. I mean, that's where you really want to be. Okay. Okay, they kicked me down again. Let's get down here. And hey, Dylan, I was totally kidding about taking shots at my name. I did not think – I am not that sensitive about my name being spelled. I was just having some fun with you. No worries at all. It's all good. And I'm sorry your dad spells it that wrong. I blame his parents. I mean, really, because Brian with a Y is really the way to go. But I was completely kidding about that. Let's see here. Jonathan says, if Tommy Rees has a great offseason like we all hope, do you think he gets hired as a head coach under the guise of being the next Lincoln Riley? I don't. Not this year, no. I don't think so. I think he's going to need to see. I mean, look, Lincoln Riley had several good years. I'm going to look it up, but Lincoln Riley was at East Carolina for a couple of years, putting up really good production. Then he went to Oklahoma and was their offensive coordinator for a couple of years. So he was at East Carolina for 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So he was at 5 years as the offensive coordinator at East Carolina. Then he was an offensive coordinator for 2 years at Oklahoma. So he had 7 years as an offensive coordinator under his belt. And the reason he got hired as a head coach is because the school he was working for hired him. He was not hired outside. It's a lot harder to get a big-time program like Oklahoma to hire a coordinator from outside than it is to promote from within. So I think it's a different situation. So I would say no. And I also think Tommy Rees, I mean, look, Tommy Rees played at Notre Dame. He's now coaching at Notre Dame. Tommy Rees loves Notre Dame. I don't think he's in a hurry to go be a head coach somewhere, especially at his age. I just don't see it. And look, Lincoln Riley is 37 years old now. He was hired in 2017, so that would be okay. He was 20 and he was 37 in 2020, and he was 36. He was 34 years old when he got hired as a head coach too. Tommy Rees is still only 28 years old. So, I mean, he's got some time. He's got some time. Do I think Tommy Rees is eventually going to be a head coach? Absolutely. Let's just let him develop at Notre Dame first. And also, I don't think he's in a hurry to leave. And I don't know that. I've heard that Tommy loves Notre Dame. He loves being at Notre Dame. His dad works at Notre Dame. I don't see him being in any hurry to leave Notre Dame, especially at 28 years old. He stay here, develop, learn a lot. He'll learn from Marcus. He can learn from Elston. He can learn from Kelly. There's still a lot he can learn, and it's going to be good for him. Here we go. If Jack Cohn is in the Heisman running, Kyron is winning it. I love it. I love it, John. Here we go. They're putting up the bat signal on Twitter again. They usually put that up the day before someone commits. Holden Stace is going to announce tomorrow at 5 o'clock. You can figure it out. Jonathan says if we can get Junior, I think he and Freeman will bring back the age of the Mike being the star defensive player. And Jonathan, I'm right there with you. So I don't know who said that, but if JJ was balding, would the beat writer say the same thing? No, because it wouldn't be a conversation. He wouldn't be asked about it. There'd be no need to defend the coaching staff if he was balling. Now, yeah, and if he was balling, he wouldn't have left. He'd still be at Notre Dame if he got that opportunity. Okay, here we go. Omar asked this question. I get you always want to develop high upside, low bottom guys, but can the end position talent get to the point where you don't take as many projects? I have Omar. If I've said it this way and it was taken that way by people, I apologize. That's not what I'm saying. I don't believe in taking a lot of projects. We might define projects differently. Adi Ogundiji was a project. Darren Agu is not a project. Alexander Ahrensberger was a project. Aiden Gabera is not a project. There's a difference between being a guy that needs time to develop physically and a guy that really needs to just learn everything. And that's a project. You know, a guy that's got a long way to go physically, it can be a project. A guy that simply is raw technically but has the body is not a project per se. In some instances, he will, Ahrensberger being one. But in most instances, I don't view those guys as projects. I view them as high ceiling guys. Their floor may be lower than others, but I'm not talking about like a 3-star guy with 5-star upside. I'm talking like 3.5 to 4, which is like a top 300 player. Darren Agu, to me, is a top 250 player now. Right now, he's a top 250 player. He has 5-star upside to where he could be a top 15 player someday. He has that kind of ceiling. I don't view him as a low bottom guy or a low floor guy. It's just he's not a 5-star today. He's not a top 100 guy today. I don't want a lot of guys that he may never play a snap or he may be great. That's not what I'm talking about. So to me, there's a difference between a lower floor guy and a high ceiling guy and a guy with a low floor, like a guy that's a project. So I hope that clears it up. I don't think they need to take a lot of projects, but at the same time, if I'm Notre Dame and I'm going to err on the side of I got this guy that can help me maybe now, but his ceiling may be a little bit lower, but he's a highly ranked top 100 guy, and a guy like Agu who may need an extra year but has a much higher ceiling, I would always err on the side of taking the higher ceiling guy. If it's a higher ceiling guy that may never play it down for you, then that's not what I'm talking about, and that wouldn't necessarily be what I would be looking for there. So I hope that clears it up, and if not, we can always continue talking about it because we got all summer. We can talk about this as much as we want. Okay, Jacob Foreman asks, what do you think the starting O-line looks like versus Florida State? Would your own personal depth chart for O-line look different than what they would likely put out there? Mine would probably look different, simply because right now, if from what I'm hearing, from what talking to sources, this is what it sounds like Notre Dame is going to go with. Okay, they are going to go with a situation where they have Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler playing left guard. they are going to go with, left guard and left tackle. And then they would go with Jarrett Patterson at right guard, Josh Lugg at right tackle. And then they would have Zeke Correll at center. I'm fine if they want to go with that 5. I would still like to see Andrew Kristofic get a chance to battle at guard. I wouldn't even mind a scenario, and I didn't say this the other day when I was asked the same question, but as I thought about it, because I think about these questions a lot, especially the really good ones, and we get a lot of those. Like, I said that on the fly, but now that I think about it, I wouldn't mind a scenario in which, Rocco Spindler and Andrew Kristofic were doing at left guard or right guard, if you moved them, what we saw from Kramer and Hainsey back in 2017, a series rotation. I wouldn't mind seeing that at all, especially as good as Blake Fisher looked. But, if you have Blake Fisher starting, Josh Lugg starting, Andrew Kristofic or Rocco starting, Correll starting, and Patterson starting, I think that 5 can work. I don't love the idea of putting the 2 freshmen side by side. I would, maybe move Patterson to left guard and Rocco to right guard, and get a veteran by each of those guys. It's personally what I would do. But the staff sees them every day, and if they're confident in it, at least give them a shot, because you can make a case that they're 2 of the 3 most physically gifted offensive linemen on the roster. If 2 of them, at least 2 of the most 4. All right, Patrick Levy says, with the unknowns at receiver, with Austin's health and JJ transferring, could they use Mayer in the spot Boyk and Claypool played to get others on the field, Takis, Bauman, and Styles? Patrick, I think they could do that at times. I do. I don't know if it's needed from the standpoint of they don't have another W. I'll answer it 2 ways. Number one is, if Notre Dame is going to continue to use the W as sort of that big power forward type of guy, the one-on-ones, the big body catches, the Javon McKinley, the Miles Boykin type of deal. If that's how they're going to use the W, and Kevin Austin's hurt, and there's no Jordan Johnson, you have Deion Colzie and the tight ends that fit that mold. That's really it. And so in that instance, then I think you would have to do a lot more formationally out of your 12 personnel and 11 personnel. And we saw this in the spring game. We saw it with the blue team late in the game, where they had trips to one side and Mitchell Evans was backside by himself. He was in a flex position. It wasn't truly split out. He's kind of flexed off, which is like up, but only 4 or 5 yards off the tackle. And they ran kind of a sort of a smash high-low concept backside. With Michael Mayer, yeah, you could do that. And then it's like, okay, how do you defend it? Do you keep a corner backside and then we got size, or do you put your corner over and then now you've got a linebacker and safeties into the boundary. And so now there's some things you could do with your running backs out of the backfield to where you don't have a corner to that side. So now you don't have a corner that can cover your running back to that side. And now what are you going to do with your safety? You're going to keep your safety backside? Are you going to go one-on-one with him and a linebacker, one-on-one with him and the safety? You can put him in binds. I just don't know if that's what you want to do for an entire game. And so that's why I don't know if it would be something I would use all the time, but it's definitely a role that they would play. And honestly, the second part of my answer, Patrick, is you adjust your offense to where you don't need that power forward backside anymore. And I would like to see them do that anyway. But that doesn't mean in those instances, Patrick, that you still can't use Michael Mayer that way. And then it makes it even more of a change up, because if you're not playing big boy football in the boundary all the time, power forward football in the boundary anymore, like they have in recent years. And so teams aren't really preparing for it a ton. And then you just throw Michael Mayer out there for 10, 12 snaps a game. It's an even bigger change up. They have to look at it way different because they're not preparing for it. So like if you look at the 2015 offense, they didn't ask Chris Brown to be that guy. They used advantage of the speed more, crossers and drags. And you think of the biggest play Chris Brown made that year was against Clemson, was on a crossing route, just getting them in speed and using them in speed. I'd like to see more of that stuff. And so I think that I'd like to see them adjust and not play that big boy football on the boundary, even if Deion Colzie and Kevin Austin are manning that position. I'd like to see it be more spin, move those guys around, put them in the slot at times, put them as the trips, have a one tight end backside and put your 3 receivers to the field. You can really create some binds with teams that way. And, especially if you have a guy like Michael Mayer that can stretch the field, you can run him on some vertical routes and then bring those speed guys on high lows backside, from crossers and digs and ends and stuff. So you can get real creative with it that way. But I think it's part of the philosophical shift I'd like to see them make and get away from the power forward football and get more towards speed and running and those type of things. Even if there are big guys like Deion Colzie, you still do those things. And then you allow him to use his size. Because look, if Deion Colzie's running a crossing route and he's got a little 5'10", 5'11" corner chasing him, even if that guy's in good position, you could throw that ball up and let him go make that play. We saw Ian Book and Brandon Wimbush both do that with Miles Boykin in 2018. And so I'd like to see some of that stuff as well. Okay. Sid Irish says, he says to Omar, I'm surprised more elite DNs aren't beating Notre Dame's door down. We put them in the league like a few do. Now, I understand the point, but let's remember something. That didn't start happening till the last 2 drafts. We talked about Notre Dame having 4 defensive ends taken from that one class. Well, that just happened within a year of each other, if you think about it. So it takes time for those messages to resonate. Mike Elson has only been able to say, I put 4 DNs from one class, from one depth chart, from one team into the NFL. He's only been able to say that for 6 days now, right? 7 days now, because that they all got picked on. No, they got picked on day 3. So they got picked on May 1st. So it's only been 6 days he's been able to say that. And so it's going to take some time. However, I do think you are starting to see that have an impact. Look at Tyson Ford. Look at Aiden Gabbero. Look at Darren Agu. There's some 2023 DNs that are very highly ranked that know a lot more about Notre Dame now than most sophomores know about Notre Dame. So I do think we're saying that. All right. Let's get back here to some more questions. Let's try to wrap this up. I'm going to try to go quickly. Saban and Jimbo going at it. Saban is funny. I read that comment to my dad. That was great. So Jimbo Fisher basically said they're going to beat Alabama's behind. And I think his comment was said in jest too. They used to work together. They're considered good friends from everything I've ever heard. Him and Jimbo are good friends. So I don't think this was like taking a shot like a Lane Kiffin likes to do, or back in the day with Spurrier and Bowden. I think this is a lot of fun. And so the reporter asks him, like, hey, Jimbo Fisher said that, they're going to beat your butts. And then she said, but he didn't use that word. And Saban, just in his very dry sense of humor, says, in golf? And it was just a great response. And I had the same response. Sid Irish says, I want to hate Saban, but I can't. I definitely understand that. Okay, Jay Clamp and Investments. I missed the start. Do you think Notre Dame will put up a billboard looking for a wide receiver coach? Come on. All right. As far as the bat signal, they all put those up. The whole staff will end up putting that up. So I think we all know who's that in reference to. Okay, Sean Rogers asks, this is a good one. Do you think players' rankings are over-affected by a kid that balls out in 7-on-7 camps? What I mean is, so often it seems like a kid with a decent tape gets crazy bumps. Absolutely. That's one of those biases I'm talking about as far as camps. I mean, it's like a receiver. When I see a 7-on-7 camp, I look for footwork and length, and there's things you can evaluate. But when you see these kids making these great catches over the middle, doesn't mean anything to me because he knows he's not going to get hit. What's he going to do when Kyle Hamilton's there with shoulder pads and helmet on? You know what I mean? That's a whole different animal. And so I do think we overdo it. Do I think there's value in those 7-on-7 camps? Yes, there's value in it. It's like with quarterbacks too. Like, it's easy for you to step into the pocket and make this throw to triple coverage when there's nobody trying to blitz you, right? Or no one can hit you. And so that's why I say it has to be the talent. Jonathan says, is Foskey being underhyped? With his physical development and limited results on the field, it seems like he's about to have a serious breakout season. So Isaiah Foskey in 1 year has gone, actually not even that, in 6 months has gone from the favorite of many fans to now he's ready to get beaten out by Jordan Botelho, and I have no idea why. It's one of those things that it's this organism that's created amongst certain fans where they glab onto this, and it's the most recent guy. And you look at Jordan Botelho. I mean, Isaiah Foskey this past year as a second-year player has 4.5 sacks. I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, Julian Aguara had in his second year at Notre Dame, he had 2.5. He had 2.5 sacks through 4 years. Isaiah Foskey in 2 years, and Isaiah Foskey in two years has 4.5 sacks. I don't understand it. It's like, he's a rising junior. He's actually a redshirt sophomore, and he's been really good so far. I think they're both going to play. It's just like some people can't just say, hey, we're good at this position. We're loaded. It's like we got to pick a guy, and Jordan Botelho's the new guy. And so now it's because he's my new guy, that means I have to say Foskey's overrated. So I think there's something to it, Jonathan. I think Foskey's going to have a big year, and I think Foskey having a big year doesn't mean that Jordan Botelho also can't have a big year. That's the exciting part about the depth that Notre Dame has. Gabe Weiss says this year feels like such a program prover for BK, had an enormous amount of draft picks this year. Now he has to prove even while he can produce picks, he can still reload the roster behind them. I agree with that. I think there's a lot to that. I mean, look, this is not the first year that Notre Dame has lost a lot of draft picks. And this isn't the first year Notre Dame has lost a lot of important draft picks. But this is certainly the most draft picks that Notre Dame has lost. I mean, as I mentioned, this is the most since 1994 that they've lost. But it's not, it's not like this number that's just like they were losing 3 and 4 a year. Let's not forget in 2017, Notre Dame goes 10-3. They lose a draft class that includes the number 6 overall pick in the draft, right? They lose the number 9 pick in the draft and Mike McGlinchey, Durham Smythe. They lost Equanimity St. Brown. They only had 4 draft picks, but they also lost Josh Adams. I mean, there were some guys that they had on that team that didn't get drafted. And they went out the next year and went 12-0. And then after that year, they had 6 guys get picked off that next year's team, and the next year they went out 11-2. Last year they lost 6 guys. They lost Cole Kmet, Chase Claypool, Julian Ekwar, Troy Pride, Khalid Kareem, and Alohi Gilman. 6 draft picks. They also lost Dante Vaughn. They lost Jalen Elliott, who were undrafted free agents. I mean, so they lost a lot of guys, and then they come out this year and they go undefeated. So I think Brian Kelly's already proven that he can reload his football team. But at the same time, we've also seen years where they lost a lot of premium players, like 2015, and then they came back that next year and they were pretty disappointing. So, I think that there is a lot that has to go into this. I think there's a lot that Notre Dame needs to prove. I think that Notre Dame needs to show that they can be a 10-plus win team again with losing all those picks. And it would kind of put a final, feather in Brian Kelly's cap. He can't use the excuse of, you go 9-3 against a schedule that's not elite and say, we lost all these guys. Well, Alabama lost more than you did. And they're still going to be a really good team. Ohio State lost a lot of guys. They're still going to be a really good team. So, yeah, this is an opportunity for him to prove that, hey, this is our floor. Our floor is 10-2. That the 8-4, 9-3s, 9-4s, that's behind us. The floor is 10-2. The next step is focusing on the ceiling, and that being a national championship. Okay. Yeah, see, this is my point, see? So this is what he says. Coach for the beat writer part, they don't grade recruits. They said people on the staff said that about Jordan Johnson. That's my whole point. That's ridiculous that a coaching staff person would tell a beat writer that. What's the purpose of that? The purpose is to take blame off yourself and put it on the kid. He's not that good. He's overrated. No, you're the problem. You didn't develop the kid. You're the problem. And I would really like for us to stop talking about Jordan Johnson. He's gone. It is what it is. But that's the frustrating thing because we saw the same crap with Phil Dracovic, and now all these fans are going to rip Phil Dracovic. There was a thing the other day where Phil Dracovic was a guy that some people are predicting to be a first-round draft pick. And a Notre Dame fan said, well, that'd be shocking. And I'm like, well, only to Notre Dame fans would that be shocking because you've been convinced by the coaching staff that he wasn't that good. He was overrated. Well, no, he wasn't. John A1 says, outside of Kyle Hamilton, who is Notre Dame's projected best defender in space? That's a good question. Projected to be Notre Dame's best defender in space. I would say probably Jack Kaiser. Based on what we saw last year, based on what we saw in the spring game, based on the position he plays, I'd probably say Jack Kaiser. I'm hoping that Clarence Lewis comes into that. I think Clarence Lewis could be a really good space tackler, which is important. I think he's a good tackler. So yeah, I think he'd probably, just off the top of my head, probably go Jack Kaiser would be my next best guy. Let's see here. Okay, so you were talking about more Aaronsberger than Nagu. Then yeah, I mean, but again, Notre Dame doesn't take a lot of Aaronsbergers, and I got that one. But I think we're seeing less of those. Those are not the kind of guys I would necessarily say all the time. But look, if you can give me one Alexander Aaronsberger a year, I can live with that. Because again, you're talking about such a high ceiling, but it's something you choose to do, not necessarily something you have to do. And you're taking that guy because, look, you get an Alexander Aaronsberger every year, every 2 to 3 years, one of those guys is going to pan out and be a stud. And I like that, but again, you're not passing on Darren Nagu or Tyson Ford to take that guy. And they haven't done that. Michael Hughes. Notre Dame has been up and down 12, 15, 17, 18, 20 as far as the national conversation. What about the spring has you confident that Notre Dame will be in the conversation when the college football playoff rankings start to come out? Well, for me, Michael, it's because I think I would add 2019 into that conversation because, again, when you look at Notre Dame in that mix, Notre Dame was a top 10 team going into the later parts of the season. I'm trying to look it up. I think when the Michigan loss was in 2019. But even then, Notre Dame had a disappointing October 26th. Notre Dame had a disappointing 10-2 season. That's kind of where you want to be when that's your floor. When you go 10-2 against a not great schedule, to me, I think that's where my confidence comes from. Is that the floor has changed now, and here's why that matters to me. When the floor is changed and the floor is now 10-2, if things then work in your favor, you don't need when the floor is 10-2, you don't need as many things to go in your favor to take that jump to be a title contender. And when you go into a season and you're like, we're an up and down team. Well, like LSU, for example, you go look at the 2 years outside of their championship team, and there's some ugly stuff in there, right? But Notre Dame's they haven't had that high, but they don't have the lows that LSU has. And so to me, when I look in, like Florida State went through a little bit of that. So to me, when I look at Notre Dame, I say, well, we already know what the floor is. When the floor is there, then it allows you to say, okay, well, we just need a couple breaks to go our way to where we can then say, we're a title contender. And so when you look at where Notre Dame is at, and you say, if Jack Cohn's what I think he is, and if a couple receivers step up, and if this and this and this, then Notre Dame could be right back in the playoff conversation. I'm not going to predict it because there are some more ifs than normal, but it wouldn't shock me either because the bar has been risen so high. Coach Kelly has risen that bar so high. And so to me, it's just because of that consistency now for 4 years where, look, Notre Dame has been ranked in the college football playoff top 4 in 3 of the last 4 years. And the year they weren't, they went 11-2. And so I think the recruiting success too in recent years has me thinking that as well. So Michael follows up over the last, other than 17-18, they haven't been able to put back-to-back seasons together from a national perspective, even with the run of 10-1 seasons. I would agree with that because that 19 was the down year, but I think that to me, I don't look at it in necessarily back-to-backs. I think we have to expand it a little bit, right? And to your point, 3 of the last 4 years, Notre Dame has been in the playoff conversation. Twice they made it. And then the other time that they didn't make it, 17, they got all the way up to 3rd in November. And so, I mean, that's a good stretch. And then after that 2017 team, you lost Quentin Nelson, you lost Mike McGlinchey, you lost Josh Adams, you lost Equanimous St. Brown, your quarterback, you lost him in different ways. You lost some good football players from that 2017 team. And then the next year you went out and you're even better. And then from that 2018 team, you lost Drew Tranquil, Tavon Coney, Julian Love. You lost some really good football players. But the next year you were down and you still went 10-2. And 10-2 is still a good year. It's just it can be disappointing relative to expectations. And that's where you want to be, where we're kind of bummed about 10-2. But when you look at that team, I don't see a Georgia on the schedule. I think that's part of it too. And if you take Georgia off the schedule, Notre Dame can better overcome that loss to Michigan. It was rainy. It was this, it was that. And they would have been the 2nd or 3rd ranked team in the country at the time. Well, then they fall up to 10, which still gets them into striking distance to get back into the 4 if they went out. You get what I'm saying? So I think the schedule is also part of it. That was kind of a long answer, but I just think we're in this consistent era where we've established a new floor at Notre Dame. Now the question is can you take it to that next step? And I think that Notre Dame has the talent at the key positions to get there. It's just, will the coaching put those players in position to be successful? All right, last few. We got to wrap this up. It's getting super long. Dropping dimes. Who is the team will most likely give us a loss? I don't think there is a team that is most likely to give Notre Dame a loss. I think Notre Dame has a better roster than everybody on the schedule. That doesn't mean they're going to win every game. I'd say there's a group of 3 or 4 that that have the talent to potentially beat Notre Dame, but I don't think anyone's most likely. I think you look at Cincinnati, I look at Wisconsin, North Carolina, and USC based on just preseason expectations are 4 teams that are good enough to give Notre Dame a loss. I think Purdue could be a team that sneaks up on Notre Dame. At Virginia Tech is that trap game, which I was asked about last time. I think it's going to be something like that more so than the better teams. Because I think when you're as good as Notre Dame is, I think sometimes, and we see this at Alabama, we've seen this at Clemson, sometimes your loss isn't to the next best team in your league. Your loss is to some team that you're not expecting because maybe your focus isn't there yet. You know, when Notre Dame beat Clemson, it was their first regular season loss since 2017. The team that beat them in 2017 was 4-8 Syracuse, right? And you look at the team that beat them in 2016, the year they won the title. It wasn't. They played a really good schedule that year. It wasn't Auburn. It wasn't. It was Pitt, right? Alabama lost back-to-back years to Ole Miss, not LSU, not Florida, not Georgia, Ole Miss. Right. And so I think Ohio State, what are the last 2 regular season games Ohio State has lost? I believe if I'm correct on this, they didn't lose a regular season game in 20. They didn't lose a regular season game in 19, which means the last time they lost a regular season game was in 2018 to Purdue. Before that, it was to Iowa. So I think that's the kind of thing that I'm more concerned about than maybe a USC, because I think Notre Dame's going to be up for the USC game. And when they have a better roster, then they're going to be up. Plus, Notre Dame just hasn't lost at home in a long time. So it's hard for me to predict they're going to lose at home. And if you look at the schedule of the three of the 4 best teams they play that I just mentioned, 3 of them are at home and the other one's on a neutral field. They're if you say their 4 best opponents based on what we know now, they don't play any of them as true road games. I think that helps the schedule as well. This offense sounds like it has a potential to be streaky. I think especially early. Especially early. There we go. Gabe Weiss, Notre Dame going to put up a billboard in Germany for Alexander Ehrensberger. I don't think so. Those billboards are meant for recruiting first and then branding second. I don't think that Germany is still going to be a hotbed just yet. Old Grim says, I still think they're reloading. That's also, that's probably the best way to say it. I gave like a 10-minute answer, and Old Grim comes in here with 6 words and says, I still think they're reloading. And that's really where I'm at. And I think this team is very talented, and we don't know who all the best players are going to be, but that's what you see from best teams. That you recruit well, you develop, and then new stars emerge year after year. I think that's where Notre Dame is at. Jordan Schreiber says, loving the flood of indie chaps. Keep it up, gents. We're definitely going to do it. Lucas Chapman, I assume, Lucas, that you're referring to the space question. Is that what you're referring to when I said who's the best in space? If it's Kaiser, I'm assuming that's what it's going to be. Dynasty ISP, happy Friday. Make sure to hit the like as I did. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you so much for that. Lucas Chapman asked, do you see Williams being utilized more like ProSize was while in 2 RB sets? I think there's certainly something to that. I think that he'll do even more in the slot. CJ made a lot of plays out of the backfield. I think we'll see Kyron doing that, but I also think we're going to see Kyron lining up as a receiver more frequently. Okay, realist. Let's see here. LGND Killa, love the name. Do you think the 05 squad could beat the 2012 squad? Yes, I do. I think the 05 squad would have scored a lot on the 2012 team. I don't think, and with all due respect to Bennett Jackson and Matthias Farley and Zeke Mata and Bennett Jackson, or Kavari Russell, Bennett Jackson, Zeke Mata, and Matthias Farley. With all due respect to them, they're not covering Jeff Samardzija and Mostoval and Anthony Fasano. They're just not. They would pick that team apart, in my opinion. Sid says the 2012 defense would beat up the 25 team. I don't agree with that. I think it'd be a perimeter game and a downfield game, and they would have no match. I mean, let's not forget something here real quick. That Notre Dame team scored 27 points on the eventual national runner-up. I think 27, right? No, they scored over 30 points on the eventual national runner-up. They scored 20 points on an elite Ohio State defense. And if you think that Notre Dame defense in 2012 was good, let's not forget who Ohio State had in 2005. And Notre Dame still moved the ball on them. I mean, Brady threw for almost 300 yards that game. I mean, Notre Dame was in the fourth quarter. I think they'd have a hard time. And that was a pretty good Notre Dame offensive line, too. The 2005 team was much better than the 2016. Okay, Brian says, if Malik Zaire stayed for the 2017 season and won the QB job, do you think our offense would have been better? I do. I think it would have been better because Malik and Brandon are very similar players. I think Malik is more confident in himself than Brandon, and I think Malik would have been older, so I think he would have been ahead of the game as a runner. I don't know if Malik would have been as explosive athletically as Brandon was, because I don't know if Malik was fully recovered. I don't know if he ever fully recovered from that injury. At least Florida didn't have him a chance. Connor, thanks, Coach. Have a good weekend all. Appreciate it. Dylan D says, if they don't get in the college football playoff for the last year of Kyle Hamilton, I'm going to be heartbroken. I definitely get that. Sage Wallace, love the show. Thanks for using my comment anytime. Come back and join us. D-Rock, my cue before exiting, hit the like button, share, and subscribe. Another content-worthy show. Nice job, Brandon. Go Irish. And so the reason he say this is like button, shares, subscribes, all those things help us grow our channel. If you're in a position where you can financially support our channel, that's awesome. We appreciate it. Not everyone's in that position. And so you say, well, I can't give money. How can I help? Tell your friends about our show. Tell your friends about our channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification, comment, do all those type of things. Share it on social. All those type of things helps us grow. And by growing, we then benefit financially. So if you're in position to help us with super chats, love it. Thank you so much for that. If you can't, those are the ways you can still help us and to help us grow our channel. Jonathan says you should have a debate episode where you and Vince prep and debate stuff like the 05 versus 12 teams. The problem is either we always agree or Vince is unwilling to disagree with me. But so here's a little glimpse to what we're going to do some things this summer. I've had people ask me about the best all-time running backs at Notre Dame, and I think that's going to start some debates. But I do think that might be a good one. Is kind of comparing, maybe we can do an all Notre Dame playoff team. And what I may do is I may take, create a seating and we'll maybe make a poll on our YouTube channel and say, who would you pick? And then Vince and I'll debate it. And then y'all can have your opinions of we'll go playoff. Okay, round one, who wins between the 2017 team is the 3 seed and the 2015 team is the 6 seed or something like that. It'd be fun. And we're going to try to do some stuff like that this summer. So make sure you pay attention. And then the last question from Liam. Will Hamilton stay if championship is a good possibility? I don't think so. I think the only way Kyle Hamilton comes back for a senior year is if it's going to help improve his draft stock. And that's exactly how it should be. If Kyle Hamilton has a chance to be a top 15 draft pick, then he needs to go, because you come back, you may win a championship, but the odds are maybe even better that you have an injury or your play regresses, or as you have more film, teams start picking apart things a lot more. If you're a top 15 pick, if you're a top 20 pick, you have to go. I don't care how much you love your team, you have to go. And I think Kyle would be in that situation. And if I was advising him and the NFL's telling me, hey, he's going to be a top 15 pick, and the coaches are saying to him, I'm not saying they're going to do that, I'm just trying to make a point. The coaches are saying to him, hey, look, come back. We could be a national champion, and we're going to need you, to Sid says about the 2022 schedule, we need you against Austin and Clemson. I say, hey, look, I get all that, but this is the time where it's got to be about you. You have to focus on what's best for you now. The season's over. You gave everything you had. Your decision to go pro or come back can't be about what's best for your team or your teammates. Your decision has to be about what's best for you. And every single player would make the same decision in that situation. Now, some it may be best for them to go back. Others it may be for whatever reason. But for me, if I'm advising Kyle Hamilton and he's going to be a top 15 to 20 pick next year and he's healthy, you have to go. I mean, that's what's best for Kyle Hamilton. So anyway, that's going to be it. Good response so far to our thing about the debates of kind of the playoff. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, we have a lot of recruiting stuff. So super long show today, our longest by far. Didn't feel like it was 3 hours long, but a lot of good conversation and the numbers stayed great. Appreciate all y'all so much. Have an awesome rest of your day on Friday. Have a safe weekend. And as always, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and check out irishbreakdown.com. So everybody be safe. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.